Hey guys, it's Den. One Piece spans over 1,000 chapters, dozens of arcs, and hundreds of years of in-universe history. From the mysterious Void Century to the rise of the Pirate King, from ancient weapons to modern revolutions, every event is connected in a timeline more epic than pretty much any other series. In this video, we're putting it all together, this entire One Piece timeline explained from the very beginning to where we are now. And at the end, we'll make a few speculations to where it will finish. But jumping straight into it, there's a few things we need to understand first. So essentially there are three timelines. We have the Age of the Sea Circle, the Age of Heaven, and then we kind of have the modern day timeline where, you know, if something happened 1,000 years ago, we just say 1,000 years ago. But this will all become much clearer as we go through everything. The Age of the Sea Circle is the calendar used by Mont Blanc Noland in his logbook around 400 years ago, which was dated the year 1120. Based on exact dates given by Noland, the month-day division in this calendar appears to match the Gregorian calendar. So what we're saying here is the calendar Noland was using is pretty much a regular calendar that we use on a day-to-day basis in the real world. We don't know if the Sea Circle calendar is still used in the modern day in One Piece, or if it was ever used outside of Leneve Kingdom or the North Blue. But we can use information to identify the fact that that timeline or that date happened about 400 years ago. Again, don't worry if it's confusing, this will become clearer. Now, onto the Age of Heaven. This is the calendar that was used when Nico Robin pretended to recite the history of Alabasta from the poneglyph in the Tomb of the Kings. In reality, the poneglyph held information about Pluton, which was revealed in Wano. Due to the circumstances, it is unclear whether the information she provided was accurate. It's not exactly known where these dates sit in relation to everything else in the One Piece world because we never had any explicit references that we can cross-check, but there are some hints that give us some soft confirmation when this took place, and it fits in the whole grander scheme of the One Piece cycle. So a bit later we'll get into that and we'll explain how all that works and what likely happened 800 years before the Void Century. So I'm going to start with the Age of Heavens, and then we'll go into the Age of the Sea Circle alongside the main timeline, and piece by piece we'll be able to put together what happened throughout the years in the One Piece world. So in the year 239 of the Age of Heavens, Kihira conquers Alabasta. In the year 260 Age of Heavens, the Baitian dynasty of Tamar begins its rule. In the year 306 Age of Heavens, the Great Taft Temple was completed in Eremalu. Finally, in the year 325 of the Age of Heavens, the hero of Altea, Mamudin, but then the sentence was cut off, so we never got confirmation on what Robin was actually going to say, suggesting that this is probably the most important piece of information we've got out of the 4 years that we were given from the Age of Heavens. All of this was given, as I said, when Robin was lying to Crocodile about Pluton. So while the accuracy isn't 100%, we can presume it's probably relevant and probably legit because she's from Ohara. It's thematically relevant here. So now I'm going to move into the main timeline, the one that we're in now. And as we go through it, it'll explain when the Age of Heavens took place and when the Age of Sea Circle took place and how everything fits in. So the oldest date we have in the One Piece world is the Tree of Knowledge, which was planted by the ancient people of Ohara 5,000 years ago, told to us in One Piece Yellow Card Grand Elements, page 233. It's just a basic description of the Tree of Knowledge, essentially. Now, 1,000 years later, which is 4,000 years before the present day, the Palace of Alabana was built. So 4,000 years before the current storyline, there was activity going on in Alabasta. In the Age of Heavens, there was mention of Alabasta, so we're starting to see a soft connection there. Now, skipping another 1,000 years forward, we get to 3,000 years before the main storyline, where a facility was built on Elbaf, told to us in 1144, when Lilith gives a rough estimate. Now, 1,500 years before the current storyline is when the Age of the Sea Circle likely started. We know this because 1,100 years ago, we saw that it was the year 402 in the Sea Circle calendar. So 1,100 plus the 400 gives us 1,500 years ago. That's when the Age of the Sea Circle started. 400 years after the Age of the Sea Circle started, so 1,100 years ago, that's when Shandora was built and was prospering, all of which is explained to us in chapter 261. 100 years later, so 1,000 years before the current timeline, Zunisha is born, which is hinted at because it's the earliest known sighting of the elephant, told to us in chapter 802. It's at this time that the Mink tribe isolate themselves from the outside world on the island of Zo, carried on the back of Zunisha. This is also when a quarrel between the Long Arm tribe and the Long Leg tribe begins, which probably parallels something to do with Emu and Joy Boy, because the Long Leg tribe was shown to offer their immortal souls to the devil so they could get revenge on the Long Arm tribe, which is where we see Brooke summoned. 100 years later, so 900 years before the current timeline, the Don Quixote family persecute the Tontatas. The Void Century begins, and in this period, Joy Boy ate the Hito Hito no Mi model Nika and became the very first pirate in history, revealed to us in 1114. A great civilization dominates the planet from one corner to the next, and great weapons of mass destructions are built, which is actually told us quite early on. It's chapter 395. It's during this year that the Iron Giant Emeth was constructed, and that Joy Boy attempted to raise the Noah with Poseidon's aid, but he breaks his end of the bargain to Fishman Island, and Noah was never raised, leaving it where the Straw Hats found it and awaiting its purpose to be fulfilled. So we see 900 years ago in the One Piece world, there was a lot of activity. The Void Century began, Joy Boy's very active. Potentially he was the one who built Emeth, considering he was involved with Noah and these other kind of plans that we see play out over centuries. But this is where we kind of get more into the actual details. So 70 years later, which is 830 years ago, Toki was born. The significance here is that it means that the Amatsuki clan were in Wano 830 years ago, which is during the Void Century. Now, 70 years ahead, we go to 800 years ago. This is around the time of the end of the Void Century. After a great war, Shandora is destroyed. This is when we believe Joy Boy stored a mythical treasure called the One Piece at the final island of the Grand Line. An organisation of 20 royals formed an alliance against the Great Kingdom and Joy Boy, defeating him in a great war, marking the end of the Void Century. It's during this time the sea rose by 200 meters, which is huge. That level of change will affect every single person on the planet undoubtedly, and could very well be the cleansing that the Gorosei have referred to in the past. In the same century, the ancient weapons also disappear under mysterious circumstances, and we see the poneglyphs are built by the Kazuki family. The 20 rulers go on to create the world government and relocate to Marineford. We don't know when it was, but we know there was Lunarians up there prior to this. We've never been given a date, but this was alluded to when Marco is having kind of a flashback about Whitebeard. As they come to power, they control and censor everything that has happened in the last 100 years, at the same time outlawing worldwide the ability to research and read the poneglyphs. So laws were made probably around this time, making the Void Century and anything about it taboo, which likely includes the Ancient Kingdom and Joy Boy. The Riku family becomes the new rulers of Dressrosa after the Don Quixote family leave to go to Marineford, and they kind of make peace with the dwarves whom had suffered slavery at the hands of the Don Quixote family for the past 100 years. This is also the century that Zunisha commits a crime and is sentenced to walk the seas for eternity. Naturally, we've been given some more exposition about that through the Elbaf mural where Emu is standing on top of Zunisha. So it would appear that Zunisha was influenced by Emu and went against Joy Boy, which would explain why Zunisha's got ringed eyes, because like many of us have been speculating for 10 years or so, the ringed eyes mean possession. Pluton is hidden beneath the underground caverns of Wano. Nefertari D. Lily disappears on her way from Marineford to the Alabaster Kingdom. Cypherpole is established and is stationed at Eni's lobby to protect it. So again, so much is happening at the end of the Void Century. We've got the ancient weapons being hidden. We've got Lily disappearing under unknown circumstances, which we've speculated quite a lot about on the channel in previous videos. And Cypherpole going to Eni's lobby to protect it is important because Cypherpole deal with the world's secrets. So whatever happened at Eni's lobby, what happened to Eni's lobby, we can presume that Emu doesn't want people finding out. Or in other words, Emu was involved or caused the hole that was at Eni's lobby. Now, the following century, 700 years ago, construction of Tequila Wolf began somewhere in the East Blue for the safety of the world nobles against the world's rising sea level that was starting to cause problems globally. 59 years later, Oars is born. Now, this is probably not a coincidence. We've seen in Punk Hazard the world government do experiments making giants, so as the tides were rising and they were building these huge bridges, suddenly ancient giants are around, also known as continent pullers. So it could be that the world government created them for a purpose. 41 years after that, so 500 years ago, Oars was a ruler over a nation of people from around the world, but he dies of frostbite travelling through the northern lands and remains preserved in ice, which we get the details for in chapter 477. 40 years later, which is 460 years before the current timeline, a cure is found for tree fever that has plagued the land of Leneve, almost wiping out a majority of the inhabitants. So Nolan's country, Leneve, is suffering heavily from tree fever, which is before he was actually even born, before Calgary was born as well. 100 years later, we see it's the Sea Circle calendar 1120, which is when Nolan departs from Vera with his crew. What's interesting here is the mention of Vera, right? Because Vera is one of the 3 islands that Oda put in the Road of Laughtale as being candidates for where the final road poneglyph can be found. We know nothing about Vera except that Nolan was there. During his journey, Nolan arrives on Greenbit, where he protects the Tontata from humans. He is made a hero and a statue is erected in his honour. 2 years later, Nolan arrives on Jaya Island and brings about the end of a horrible disease that made the Shandia sick. So what we're seeing here is 100 years prior to this, in his own kingdom, the tree fever was killing people, but now they've developed a cure, and now Nolan knows how to cure other people of this, which is to cut down the trees. Now, it's interesting because the trees in Skypiea house the souls of the dead. So when Nolan cuts down the trees, people get pretty terrified. However, Neptune tells us that a tradition that's out of time becomes a curse, and we see that manifested with this. So the trees were making people sick, and the answer was to cut them down so a new era can be born, right? Which subsequently heals people of tree fever and removes the sickness. It's during this time that Nola, the giant snake, is born as well. 4 years later, a large portion of Jaya is shot into the air by the Knock-Up Stream, which starts the war between the Skypieans and the Shandians. So the Shandians were down on the ground at first, and then they were shot up 400 years ago, which means they're now sharing land with the Skypieans, which leads into conflict. The following year, Nolan brings the king of Leneve to Jaya to show him the treasures of the Shandians. He sets sail with 3 ships, but 2 are lost as a sacrifice to protect the king in a storm. When they arrive on Jaya, there is no one living there, and the city of gold is gone, and that is because it's been shot up into the sky. The king's pretty pissed, and Nolan is executed 6 months later for the lies he told about the city of gold, and this is how he gets the epithet Nolan the Liar. And that's pretty much where we leave Nolan's story. But in the following century, we see the Germa kingdom reigns over the North Blue for 66 days as the Germa Empire. All of that stuff is told to us in chapter 871, however it doesn't really tie into the rest of the timeline too much. 100 years later, which is 200 years prior to the current storyline, the Saint Briss leaves from the Briss kingdom, carrying a crew towards the Grand Line. The crew makes it to Skypiea, but then vanishes without a trace. We still don't know anything about this ship really. All it's done is given us some more context for the South Blue being very biblical because of its name, the Saint Briss, and it also gave us a mysterious portrait of a woman with a hole through her head, which kind of is reminiscent of a lot of the other portraits we've seen of dead women throughout One Piece. It's also 200 years ago that the world government makes an alliance with Fishman Island after centuries of discrimination. The institution of slavery is prohibited by the world government to secure a peace agreement. The Ryugu kingdom attends its first reverie, but doesn't attend another one until 200 years later, which we see in the current storyline with Shirahoshi. Incidentally, Emeth appears and attacks Marineford around this time too, but runs out of energy before causing damage. Saturn orders researchers to take it away and have it studied in secret, which eventually has it ending up at Egghead Island. There might be some significance to the fact that the fishermen were at the reverie 200 years ago when we consider the age of Sea Kings and the cycle by which Poseidon arrives. I understand that's probably a bit confusing. I do have a video on it, but basically, if a mermaid was given Sea King lineage, it might take about 200 years to have a child that becomes Poseidon, because it's indicated that it's not the first child, but it's the grandchild that becomes Poseidon. However, as I say, I've got a video on it if you want to hear the details. Now, over the next 100 years, we get the first main set of One Piece characters born. So we get like Dory, Broggy, Morley, Hatcher, Kashi, Carmel, Kureha, Saul. But other than that, there's nothing else really. It's more so Oda kind of prepping for us to come into the current timeline. However, something that does happen is 116 years ago, the people of Flevance discover amber lead. The world government realises that it's poisonous to the human body, but keep their research a secret for the sake of profit. Naturally, this is very important because the consequences of mining amber lead is that people's lifespan reduces generationally, which is in contrast to Emu, who seems to have extended life like the Gorosei. And this is where the history starts having more details because it ties into what's happening now. So 113 years ago, Carmel started her job as a child slaver under the name Mountain Witch. The name Witch is very interesting here because Kureha and Higurashi appear to be around the same age as Carmel, and both of them are classed as witches. Also, the mountain in Carmel's name is an allusion to Emu, who's often portrayed using the word mountain. 109 years ago, Dory and Broggy of the Giant Warrior Pirates are in their heyday of their infamy. Elsewhere, King Harold of Elbaf and his men raid a kingdom, however we don't know what the kingdom is. And we see all that in chapter 1152. During his travels he meets Ida in the Burnt Kingdom and begins to change his ways. So 109 years ago we see King Harold causing a lot of trouble and then becoming reformed. 4 years later, Harold declares to his subjects that he intends to learn more about the many cultures of the world and to bring the knowledge of said cultures back with him. So again we're seeing more reformation of Harold. 3 years later, Dory and Broggy begin their duel on Little Garden, which we see way back in chapter 116. However, the circumstances that led to them being there are still a bit of a mystery and might tie into some Elbaf lore that comes up later in the arc. This is also the exact year that the disease carrying the Kestia tick is believed to be extinct, the one that made Nami sick in chapter 139. The following year, Morley was imprisoned in Impel Down. She later digs tunnels there and creates level 5.5, which we then see later occupied by Akamaland. And if you think I mispronounced that, no, I did not. Morley is female. Pretty trippy, right? So now, without their two captains, the remnants of the Giant Warrior Pirates are captured and set to be executed by the Marines. However, Carmel convinces the Marines to let them go, and she joins them on their way back to Elbaf. There was a beam of light coming from the sky lighting her up, so the world government and Carmel were teaming up to play against the religious aspects of Elbathian culture in order to take advantage of the giant strength, something that's been referenced multiple times in One Piece to be a world-changing fighting power and highly sought after. Shortly thereafter, Carmel opens the Sheep's House orphanage and begins to watch over abandoned children. Unbeknownst to the children, however, she's using the orphanage as a front to enhance her slavery ring and continues to do so for the next 37 years. What's super interesting here is that 37 years can actually be interpreted as 38 years because we don't know when the months, right? The specific months. So that's pretty strange because the God Valley incident was 38 years ago. Now, Rox was said originally to go to God Valley for one big score. And Carmel says she's retiring after the 38 years, after one big score. That one big score is implied to be Big Mum. Big Mum then goes on to join Rock's crew, and then Rox goes to God Valley for the one big score. So there's some very strange connections there. Now, 90 years before the present timeline is the year Brook was born, told to us in chapter 487. No doubt that'll become more relevant as time goes on, because he's probably seen some pretty important stuff. He's already alluded to seeing Roger as a rookie, as well as some other significant pirates, so that'll be an interesting thread to resolve. 82 years ago, Haradas left Burka to study the weather. We know this through his Vivra card. There's not much else to say about that, however, there's no doubt it will become significant later because Burka and Haradas's weather technology seems highly tied to Nami and Uranus. And we've predicted that at the end of Elbaf, at the top of the Adam Tree, there'll be a city called Asgard, or the remnants of a city, and that's where Uranus will be, as well as the path to the High West, which takes us to the Sky Islands. Now, the following year, the daimyo of the Kurozumi family poisoned the other 4 daimyos to try to gain the position of shogun. However, Kazuki Sukiyaki is born, becoming the new heir of the shogun, causing the Kurozumi family to lose its power. The head of the family committed seppuku as punishment, and the other members of the family began to be hunted down. So 81 years ago, the Kurozumi made a go at becoming shogun with some pretty treacherous methods. However, they were caught out and then they were persecuted. However, we know that remnants of the clan, such as Higurashi, did survive. And it's their plans that culminated over the next few decades into the whole situation in Wano with Orochi. Okay, so now we go to 67 years prior to the modern One Piece timeline, and we see Haradas again, and his colleagues have completed the construction of Wetheria. The following year, Haradas and his colleagues start to study the weather across the world, which has alluded to perhaps play a big part in how Vegapunk made some of the technology he has on Egghead. But now we jump 3 years forward, to 63 years ago. Lin was dropped off at Elbaf by her birth parents, never to see them again. She's brought in by Mother Carmel at the Sheep's House orphanage. This is also the same year that, shortly after Loki's birth, his mother, Queen Estrid, throws him into Elbaf's underworld, yet he manages to pull himself out. So we see Big Mum abandoned by her parents in this year, and we see Loki abandoned by his mother in this year. On the 7th day of fasting, 5 days before the winter solstice festival, Linlin destroys a village on Elbaf over a craving of Semler, killing Jorul in the process. Because of all of this, Carmel is forced to relocate Sheep's house elsewhere, but we've never been told specifically where it is. A little detail that's pretty important here is that Big Mum lasted 6 days of the fast out of the 7. On the 7th is when she wilded out. Kaido managed to do 6 attacks based on the Buddha, but didn't manage to do the 7th. This pattern occurs in other places in One Piece, but what Oda's telling us here is that this person got close to being a Joy Boy figure, but didn't quite make it. And it's because of that they become the way they are now. Once Carmel has relocated, that's when we see Linlin's 6th birthday, where it is implied that she eats Carmel and the other children. However, we're not too sure, and there's plenty of theories out there about what happened to them. Streusen witnesses all of this and goes over to a young Linlin and grooms her into creating a dream country, he calls it, which then leads to Totoland, and all of that's explained in chapter 868. The following year we cut back to Elbaf, and Queen Estrid dies a year after giving birth to Loki, while natural disasters occur in the country around the same time. So for some reason, Oda is showing us that around the exact same time, when Linlin is given up by her parents, awful things happen, and eventually it leads to the demise of her mother figure. Loki is also tossed away, and a year later, his mother figure dies, and natural disasters are occurring, so there's some sort of bad vibes definitely going on here. Let me know if you have any theories below in the comments, or if you think this could be Ragnarok, or what's happening. Now, 56 years ago is when Rox invades the Reverie and captures 5 kings for ransom. He breaks into Pangaea Castle and encounters Emu and Gunko, threatening to return to the room in the future. While fleeing, he kills a marine admiral and clashes with King Harold, helping the giant escape soon after. As a result of all of this chaos, Rox earns his first bounty. So while we don't have much information on Rox, we know that because this was his first bounty, whatever Rox was doing before, which must have been something because he's so powerful, he was likely under the authority of the world government, or a situation whereby he wouldn't be getting a bounty. Okay, 3 years later, which is 53 years prior to the current storyline, Odin is starting to waste royal funds in the Red Light District and kind of just cause problems, which we see in chapter 960. It's during this year that Loki really gets comfortable in the underground and makes friends with all the animals and sets them loose on villages. The following year, 52 years ago, Laboon arrives at Reverse Mountain with the Rumbar pirates. He is left behind with Crocus at the Twin Capes to wait for them. Gold D. Roger is recognised as a rookie. Kozaburo saves the East Blue locals from bandits and founded a village which he called Shimitsuki Village. 10 out of the 25 Wano residents settled down in this village, but we don't know what happened to the other 15 or where they settled. The following year, Odin is shown still getting into fights, gambling, being drunk, etc., causing problems. Now, 50 years ago exactly, the Rumbar pirates are forced to split into 2 after half the crew, including Captain Yorkie, contract an incurable disease. The disease actually is reminiscent of tree fever, however, we've never had explicit confirmation of what it was. Brook takes control over the healthy half of the crew, and Yorkie goes with the sick half of the crew. The Rumbar pirates are annihilated by an unknown assailant in the Florian Triangle, leaving no survivors, which we see in chapter 487. A year later, Brook's soul, thanks to the Yomi Yomi Nomi, finds his body, only to realise that it's rotted away, leaving only his skeleton and afro intact. It's during this year as well that Odin's issues kind of peak, and he kills someone and was sentenced to hard labour in the stone quarry. While he's in there, he climbs the ranks until he runs that place. So we have an unruly leader who's spending lots of royal money, and now he's paying for his consequences, and he's going through like what you'd call like a training arc in a way, right? Like he's being disciplined. It's also 49 years ago that we first hear rumblings of Kaido being revered as the ultimate soldier. However, he's not under Rock's crew at this time. The next year, Rox, Shiki, Stussy, Whitebeard, Ochoku, Ganzui, and Marlon make landfall in Elbaf and meet Loki and King Harold, asking the king to join their ranks. However, Harold denies. The following year, which is 47 years ago, Kuma is born in Saul Bay Kingdom to his father, Clap, and an unnamed woman. Now we've got the hard copies of the translations, we can see that Clap was a pastor, which is a type of priest of a Christian or Catholic church, and Kuma is then later named a pastor also. So basically, Kuma was born to a man of the church, and they lived in a church at first. Now, the following year, the Volca Kingdom tries to enlist Kaido into the Marines to join the next reverie. The year after that, so 45 years ago, Charlotte Katakuri filled his mouth with too much stuff and it rips open after eating donuts, so that gives him the distinctive smile. In Wano, the royal capital experiences a serious drought, and Odin diverts a river straight to the capital, causing it to flood. So he takes this opportunity to use the flood to escape to sea so he doesn't get caught. So we're being shown that after Odin's time in prison, he's trying now to do the right thing for the country, however, he does it clumsily and causes more destruction. The following year, Oda kidnaps women from the capital each night and forms a harem. The girls follow him of their own free will, but their lovers still try to get them back. This causes fighting to escalate, and at one point the Hyogoro family tries to stop the fight but fails. Now, also during this year, the Rocks Pirates are officially formed and set their base in Hachinosu, which is when Kaido and Kyo join the Rocks Pirates. The Roger Pirates clash with the Kuja Pirates, Vice Admiral Garp confronts Roger, and the two of them proceed to battle. It's said at this time that this is when the first clashes between Roger, Zebek, and Garp started taking place. 43 years ago, due to being part of the Buccaneer race, Clapp, his wife, and Kuma are captured by government agents and enslaved to the world nobles. This is also the same year that Katakuri eats the Moki Moki, which we're told in his Vibra card. The year after that, so 42 years ago, Boodle and his followers flee to Organ Island from pirate attacks and they set up Orange Town, which we learn all the way back in chapter 14. It's also during this year that Shaki gives up pirating to open a bar on the Sabaody archipelago. So 2 years after Shaki meets Rayleigh and they have that little romantic encounter, Shaki leaves pirating and the whole Kuja system and sets up a bar in a different part of the world. The following year is when Odin has the fight with the mountain god, which leads to his exile. So we're seeing very similar stuff to Noland here. The boar was attacking the village, but because people worshipped the boar, they didn't know what to do. Odin kills the boar and then he's excommunicated from the society, even though at this point he has learned that this is what's necessary. So we're showing now that Odin has matured into someone who needs to do what he does, however it goes against the status quo, leading him to be exiled. This gives space for Higurashi to conspire with Orochi. 2 years later, Odin does manage to get the gang of people together, which later become his retainers, and his father allows him back and gives him a region, making Odin the daimyo of that region and allowing him to keep his followers as his official retainers. It's also 39 years ago that Vegapunk creates Mats. Furthermore, Goldie Roger and his crew became the first people to reach Lodestar Island, the island at the end of the log post. But this takes us to the big incident the following year, the God Valley incident 38 years ago. So basically, 40 years ago, following an assignment, Figlan Garling and his fellow Knights of God stopped at God Valley. After seeing its vast natural resources and discovering that the Davy family was in hiding there, they offered God Valley membership status with the world government, but the people declined. So that's what we've been told so far. However, we're not exactly sure what Garling was doing there and why, he had children and stuff like that. And it could tie deeper into Shanks and his part in the D-Clan and his relationship to Davy Jones, as well as Shamrocks, naturally. So don't just think it's just a simple situation that they went to God Valley for some resources, which, as I mentioned in the intro, could be Sea Prism Stone, which I'll explain later. But yeah, there's something else going on with this island, and it might connect to maybe Nika or one of the other gods, or the sea god or something, but there's still quite a bit there to unpack. Now, while Garling was there, he met a local woman who would eventually bear his children, Shamrock and Shanks, as we said, and that takes place a year after he found the island. Due to his discoveries and its people refusing to join the world government, Garling proposed that the world nobles host the next native hunting competition on that island. The pretense for the island being chosen as the host for the event was attributed to its name and thought to be blasphemous by the Celestial Dragon community. So again, its name's God Valley, which might tie into, say, a sea god or Nika the sun god or something like that. Also, it's worth noting that it's very rare in the One Piece world for so many of these forces to come together in the same place at the same time. The only place we've seen something like that is Marineford so far, so it probably does evoke something that happened in the Void Century. Now, a year prior to the hunting competition, Shaki was abducted from Hachinosu at the request of Garling, who wanted to make her his wife by winning the competition. It was implied that the world government bribed Ochoku to allow Shaki's kidnapping, which caused the world economy to grind to a halt. So what is pretty much the most important thing to understand here is amongst Zebek's crew, someone who's tied to Davy Jones and Joy Boy, there was a traitor. And because of that betrayal, it leads to a young girl being taken. And not just any girl, but someone who's coveted as a treasure. So yes, she's at some points called the treasure of Hachinosu, but then you think about stuff like Lily. Maybe that's why Lily was taken, because she was a treasure to Emu, or maybe it was because of her royal status, and that is what makes her a treasure. But there's many incidents in One Piece where there's a betrayal, and because of it, a female gets taken away. In order to prepare the island, Garling ordered Marines at his command to round up the local population by using tranquilizer rounds, and imprisoned them with other slaves that were brought to the island, though the details of the Marines' actions were disguised as a training exercise. Garling also just straight off the bat stabbed the mother of his children and left her for dead, which is when Cadet Monkey D. Dragon, one of the Marines rounding up the civilians with the darts, discovered the dying woman who pleaded with him to save her children. Okay, so basically what Oda's telling us when Shamrock does this, it might sound a bit basic, but it is pretty important, we're being shown that these celestial dragon types are cold. They are cold people that are very totalitarian. They don't really care about what other people think. They're just going to do what they're going to do. And usually that involves basically the suffering of others. It'll be interesting to kind of unpack or see what Oda's going to do with Garling wondering where his children have gone, right? Because he knows about Shamrock, presumably because he's the Holy Knight, right? So yeah, it's strange to wonder if Garling ever tried to reach out to Shanks again. We do have a video earlier on the channel about how Shanks may have been working alongside Shamrock and may have been the one that poisoned Roger and made him sick. But yeah, if you want to see more on that, it's the Shanks and Shamrock video. You can't miss it. Now, during this pre-event preparation, the slave Ginny leaked the event's existence and prizes to the journalist Morgans, who, despite requesting hush money from Cypherpole, leaked the information to Hachinosu. So the way this goes down is basically hinted at early in the volume and the chapter that Ginny has leaked information. Now, when you're reading it, it's like, oh, wait, what's going on? Like, what is that information? And then pretty soon after, it's contrasted with shots from Morgan, basically, and him basically talking about kind of leaking information, as well as we see a couple of scenes where people have heard rumors that there's something going on there. For example, Garp, right, when he speaks to Kong. And then Kong's like, how do you know about that? Now, this leak results in the Rock Pirates and other pirates sailing to the island. While the bulk of his crew was primarily motivated by wishing to retrieve Shaki or claiming treasure for themselves, Zebek only sought to rescue his wife, Eris, and son, Teach, whom he'd hidden on the island. Okay, so despite the fact that it's pretty bad timing to hide your family on the island, and then that happens straight after, the main thing to take away here is Zebek's will. Zebek, his intentions were to save his family. Now, Blackbeard doesn't really have any family except for the SBS that we've seen, right? So how this is going to unfold is that Blackbeard, who currently is essentially got no family, and his crew, which is formed, he says, by fate, is probably going to learn that he has a relative, whether or not that's Robin or someone like that, right? He's going to learn he's got a relative, and then he's going to have to make a decision. And that is where we will see how he reacts to kind of Zebek's true will, because at the moment Blackbeard's will is destruction and it isn't family. So that is how that's going to unpack, right? And as I say, one candidate is definitely Robin because of the O'Hara connections, and they're both historians as a hobby and stuff like that. But there are other characters that could relate. As some people have speculated, you've got Buggy, right, who looks so super like Rox in that Wanted poster. So we'll see. Rox confided his motivations to go to God Valley, as well as the truth that he was a member of the Davy clan, to the Giant King Harold, who at the time was tasked by the world government to slay Rox. The Roger pirates were also informed of Shaki's presence on God Valley and wanted to reach the island ahead of the Rox pirates. So what we're seeing is Roger, a Joy Boy figure, just he doesn't have ulterior motives. He just wants to go to save Shaki, right? And we're probably going to see something similar with Luffy and Vivi, and we already almost did see it in Wano, or just after Wano, when Luffy tried to go back to save her, and the Straw Hats, particularly Zoro, was like, look, dude, that is not happening. So definitely keep an eye out for what happens between Vivi and Luffy, because Luffy needs a reason to go back down the Grand Line, just like Roger did, just like Shanks did, just like Fisher Tiger did when he went all the way down and then back up to save the slaves. So yeah, we're waiting for Luffy to have a reason good enough to go back down, and it's going to probably be Vivi's catcher, which mirrors Roger going to God Valley to save Shaki. Now, when word reached Marineford that the Rox pirates were heading to God Valley, Fleet Admiral Kong requested Garp's presence, who was on vacation. Garp initially refused the order due to his dislike of the world nobles and believing that the Knights of God provided enough protection for them, but changed his mind when informed that his longtime foe Gol D. Roger was headed there. Take note, Garp doesn't kind of mention that Xebec's going, which is interesting because they're definitely connected. But what we're seeing here is basically a Monkey Clan member just doing what they want as and when they want. And by going there and following their kind of, their path, Garp goes to God Valley. And of course, later we find out he learns the truth, or at least partly learns that the world government are not so nice. Now, in terms of the event itself, along with around 100,000 civilians marked as rabbits, there were 150 rare rabbits and 13 super rare rabbits. So just bear that in mind, 100,000 civilians, lots and lots of people, all of whom are going to get hunted down, right? And there's only 13 amongst them, which is super rare rabbits. So I don't know, what's that, 0.00013 or 0013, or I don't know, but that's a very small percentage, right? But their point is there's a lot of people on this island that are about to be got. The super rare rabbits are probably going to be related to, the significant clans we've heard of before. So you've got the Buccaneer clan with Kuma and all this stuff, and then you got the Davy family, and we've seen the auction list at Sabaody, which had different races on that people are paid for as slaves. So we can pretty easily deduce what type of people were there as the rare rabbits. Interestingly, Blackbeard wasn't brought there because of his lineage or anything. He was brought there to be protected, right? So it also adds to the kind of mysterious nature of what Blackbeard's races are, if he's got multiple races, etc., etc. There was around 200 nobles participating, including members of the Knights of God, Garling of the Figelin family, Sommers of the Shepherd family, and Gunko of the Manmire family. Also in attendance was Saint Saturn of the Five Elders. So far we haven't seen any of the other Gorosei there, which is very strange. We know that God Valley is tied to the Davy clan, right? And the Davy clan is represented often with the number 8, and we see this in lots of places with octopus and spiders. And of course, Saturn's yokai form has got 8 legs, so maybe he's there as some relation or symbolic reference to something to do with the Davy clan. But it's strange. I would expect to see other Gorosei there, particularly before Emu appears, like we've just seen in 1162. After we've seen who's there, Shaki's presented as the grand prize for the tournament, with assorted devil fruits as lesser prizes, and the event was broadcast live to Marie-Joie. So again, we're seeing a focus on the value of this particular female. She's more important than the pawpaw fruit, That is pretty extreme. So it basically evokes this idea that Lily, or some other female, but it's going to likely be Lily Nefertari, right, has some massive significant value for some reason. And again, that could be personal to Emu, or it could be more of a general sense to the rest of the world. It might be her lineage or something that's a key to Emu's immortality or something along them lines. Now, prior to the start of the competition, Garling slayed the island's king for protesting his subjects being used for the event, an act that resulted in him receiving penalty for starting early. So this is inferring that the Celestial Dragons don't play by the rules, right? They may set the rules, but then they change their own rules. Now, after giving the civilians a 1-hour head start, the competition begins and the participants begin hunting down their targets. Disgusted and horrified by the carnage he witnesses, Dragon defies his orders and tranquilizes a world noble who is about to kill Kuma. Ironically, the slaughter abruptly ended as numerous infamous pirate crews stormed the island from all sides to claim Shaki and the competition's prizes, with the Rocks pirates invading from the south and the Roger pirates from the north. The station marines were outnumbered and unprepared for the pirates, but had their morale boosted when Garp arrived with reinforcements. It's probably worth pausing here and just bearing in mind that there are people out there that say Luffy's a hero. This goes to show what these type of heroes are like. Garp came and defended the Celestial Dragons. It may have been not his intention wasn't to ensure the hunting games carry on, but this is the effects of this guy's behavior, That said, it's Garp arriving at God Valley, which creates the chaos that Dragon takes advantage of to don a disguise and escape, with a baby Shamrock and Shanks to atone for his failure in protecting the civilians. The Knights of God were dispatched to help the Marines protect and evacuate the rest of their fellow nobles, but later split to fulfill certain duties. St. Matthew was tasked with retrieving Garling's children, and a member from the Manmire family was tasked to suppress any civilians attempting to escape using the chaos, shooting down a crowd from quite a distance away. Also, Matthew tracked down Dragon and seriously wounded him, but before she could finish him off, she was unintentionally interrupted by Edward Newgate, or Whitebeard. The Knights of God Meanwhile, some of the minor pirate crews on the island ambushed the Rocks pirates to make a name for themselves, but were easily defeated by Newgate, Kaido, and Linlin, as well as Shiki. Garp attacked the 4 Rocks pirates, who reluctantly fled from him to avoid prolonging the fight. In the confusion, Dragon escaped with Shanks while Maffy reclaimed Shamrock. Not realizing that Garling had twins and assuming that Dragon was killed, Maffy considered her mission complete. On the way to Shaki, Roger was caught in a clash with Newgate, so he tasked Rayleigh and Scopocaban with retrieving her. In the chamber where Shaki was detained, several Marines attempt to take her, but she defeats all of them despite being chained up. Somers attempts to kill her, only for Rayleigh to arrive in time and cut him down, saving Shaki. Having Shaki in their hands, the Roger pirates make their escape from the island. While the fight was ongoing, the slaves, Kuma and Eva, took advantage of the chaos to steal 2 of the Devil Fruit prizes, the Niku Niku Nomi and the Uu Nomi model Siryu. However, Linlin attacked Eva and stole the Siryu fruit. After Kuma ate his devil fruit, Saturn confronted him, but Kuma managed to escape and rescue over 500 people, including Eva and Ginny. We also see him healing people and stuff like that, right? So yeah, nice one, Kuma. That's good stuff. Linlin was then attacked by Kaido, who ate his fruit before she could give it to her son Katakuri. I mean, Katakuri with the Azure Dragon fruit is just peak. That would be peak. Finally, the battle ends when Garp allegedly forms a temporary alliance with Roger to take down Rocks, but we're kind of yet to still get the full details, right? And a lot of people are speculating that we're going to get them details when Blackbeard uses Pudding to read a frozen Garp's memories. So we'll probably go back to Elbaf for a bit. There'll be more story. It'll probably wrap up quite quick in my opinion, and then when we go into the next bit, we're going to start seeing more God Valley, some bigger details. Maybe stuff about the Davy Clan in the past, a Davy Clan flashback. Maybe their relation to the Gorosei, maybe the Gorosei were Davy Clan members, stuff like that. Now, in terms of the aftermath, following this monumental battle, God Valley mysteriously vanishes without a trace, no longer showing up on world maps. So like I say, we'll get that covered, and we're going to find out what happened. Because of his role in the incident, Garp became greatly renowned, earning the title Hero of the Marines. We see this later in the story when Garp sacrifices himself for Kobe and Kobe becomes the hero of the Marines, kind of implying that there may be a situation where Rocks sacrifices himself to save Garp. He was granted many opportunities to be promoted to Admiral, but he turned them down each time due to not wanting to be the world noble's direct subordinate. We're talking about Garp, right? In addition, Garling was declared the champion of God Valley. Roger's involvement, on the other hand, was covered up by the world government. It's definitely not a good idea to kind of look too deeply into the secrecy around this event, because I'm not sure if Oda cares, but the way it's going on is a lot of people do know about this. So it should be more public, right? Dragon's very close friends, or not very close, but he has been close with Vegapunk. So if you think a bit too much about it, you'll probably start realizing that at any point people could have really revealed these details to the world and people would have been shocked. But that kind of leads to another idea, which is the world government throughout the One Piece story are never really that good at stopping things from happening, right? And I, as a fan, and a lot of other readers, I know that people get frustrated, like in Wano, they surround the island and they get away straight away. Egghead, they surround the island and everyone expected they were going to get away, they get away straight away. But I think this kind of leans into the idea that the world government isn't some super sick fighting force. The issue with the world government is Emu and the Gorosei. No one really knows about them, and they're just there all the time. So no matter what you do, no matter how many times you beat these guys, they're always going to come back until Emu is defeated, and potentially the Red Line needs to be destroyed too, right? So yeah, anyway, that's that little rant over. Now, Dragon's exposure to the horrors that the world nobles were capable of led to his eventual defection from the Marines and forming the Freedom Fighters and eventually the Rev Army in the future. The defeat of the Rocks Pirates resulted in the crew's disbandment after the death of their captain. The remaining members of the Rocks Pirates, such as Whitebeard, Big Mum, Kaido, Shiki and John, began forming various crews of their own and became legendary pirate captains in their own right. Due to them choosing not to talk about their experiences in the original crew, coupled with the world government covering up their activities, the existence of the Rocks Pirates faded into obscurity, becoming largely unknown for generations to come. In my opinion, this is a super nice touch, right? Because when you see the Rocks Pirates at God Valley, they don't care that they're Rocks Pirates. They don't know what the Rocks Pirates are or how they're significant. We do, the readers do. Because, these guys have their own egos and agendas and stuff like that. Garp was taken there naturally. These guys just tagged along with someone else who was taken there naturally, which is Zebek. So it is a nice touch from Oda. Finally, during the chaos, Shanks was placed in a treasure chest, which was found by the Roger Pirates, who raised him and took him in as an apprentice. Right, this is all about the fact that Shamrock and Shanks are twins, right? They're both essentially the same person, both given different perspectives because of their nurture rather than their nature, which is the same. So Oda's very much showing us that this is the effects of nurturing two people, even if they come from the same nature. With Shanks being the ultra-free pirate guy who I believe is probably going to restore the Davy clan above the sea and become the main protagonist over Luffy. And then we have Shamrock, which I think if Garling is killed or something like that, then Shamrock, has to make these pretty difficult decisions and become the head of the God's Knights. And then we get to see kind of Shamrock's backstory and what happened with him and then how his perspectives were developed. Some extra bits of information is Garling received the title of Champion of God Valley, but it's unknown if it had any bearing to his role in what he actually did there, or, if it was a previous competition and stuff like that. But we'll probably get that clarified in SBS. A massive influence for the God Valley incident is basically the Trojan War. And if you want to find out more about this, there's a guy in our server called Senpai J who's been talking about it recently in Dionysus and how in myth, and also in some realities, like women have played this role that have led to people going to war, which again evokes probably what happened during the Void Century. So basically, with Troy and Shaki's case, both were beautiful women who were abducted or eloped in Helen's case, resulting in invaders, pirates for Shaki and the Greeks for Helen, sailing to hostile territory, which is God Valley and Troy, to reclaim their respective women. So far, at least 11 known Conqueror's Haki users were present during the God Valley incident. So yeah, this is the biggest event by far that we know of, especially as 5 of the future 7 Emperors of the Sea were present during the incident, as well as other people that then had children, like Dragon, who has a son who becomes a Yonko, right? So yeah, this event is absolutely massive. Okay, so that's pretty much the summary of everything that happened, right? And now we can kind of take some real brief ideas. So, as in with the Sea Prism Stone, we know it's a mineral that contains the essence of the sea. We know David Jones is connected deeply to the ocean. So, these two things are probably tied. We know that the world government said they went to God Valley for a particular resource, and now we see all of their ship are coated in this resource. And this isn't the only time we've seen something like this. The Buccaneers have been tied to pastors, right, and pacifists, and then their lineage is taken and then weaponized and turned into the exact opposite, and they become pacifistas, seraphim, and essentially soldiers. So this tells us that the Buccaneers originally were probably pacifists, and that Emu twists the nature of these things. And it's the same with Sea Stone. So Sea Stone basically prevents you from being able to be detected by Sea Kings, as well as a few other things, but it probably is that the original mineral itself was probably used by the Davy clan alongside the Sea Kings, or, something like that, or they were building underwater, or they may have built structures. For example, Impel Down is a building that's at the bottom of the ocean, made mostly out of sea stone, right? So, and there are some clues in cover stories about kingdoms being at the bottom of the ocean. So it'll be interesting to see what happens with that. Additionally, I don't see many people talking about the fact that Xebec met up with Emu. You would think that situation is connected to the fact that the God's Knights and stuff were sent to God Valley. It can't just be a coincidence, right? Like, maybe Xebec provoked Emu and that's what led to this situation, which is strange because we still don't really know what Xebec was doing there. He did say he had 5 kings hostage, and it would appear that there's some sort of ritual or even a Davy back fight that requires 5 people. Like there's 5 Gorosei, and after Saturn was killed, he was instantly replaced. We see the summoning circles have 5 pointed stars in them when the abyss is used. So maybe, I don't know, maybe Emu identified Xebec has some sort of, and the Davy clan has some sort of connection to the abyss, and that makes Emu vulnerable or something, but there's still some information about God Valley we need to understand to really know why Emu takes it so seriously. Also, in 1162, we saw Emu come out the top of Saturn in this weird ghost. Some of you might have seen on Twitter and social media and that they look very like the Florian Triangle, right? Very like the Florian Triangle. Again, God Valley is related to Davy Jones. The Florian Triangle is known as the Devil's Triangle in One Piece as well. The devil, like devil fruits and stuff like that. Sea Devil, a lot of that is, associated with Davy, as we covered in the previous Davy video. So there's some strange connection between Emu and the Davy clan and the Abyss, I'm pretty sure. And it might be Shanks that finds a way, Maybe he gives himself the Mark of the Abyss or something, or he infiltrates as Shamrock or something like that, despite the scar on his face. But yeah, either way, there's still more to come about the whole reason why the world government were at God Valley, for sure. To conclude, the God Valley incident was 38 years ago, which is 3-8, matches the 3-8 number scheme we get for Davy, Zebek, and Blackbeard. The world government went there and really stirred shit up, and although we see pirates kind of come to the rescue, it must be the case that most of the people there died, which is probably because the island was disappeared, right? We don't know what's happened to it, we'll find out, but I'm guessing all the civilians that were on the island weren't like taken by holy knights and stuff. I'm guessing when the island was destroyed, like Lalesia, which we also know is connected to Zebek, was probably destroyed and everyone went with it. Now some time has passed since the God Valley incident. The survivors of the Rock's pirate crew start recruiting their own crew members, which we see in chapter 962. It's also during this year that Inarashi and Nekomamushi wash up on Wano's shores after leaving Zou, where they, along with Kawamatsu, are tortured by the locals, but are saved by Odin, who recruits him as his retainer. And this is when Yasui has Odin's samurai trained to be pretty highly skilled. The year after this, so 32 years ago, Cutty Flam and his parents enter the Grand Line. However, we really do not have much confirmed solidly about Frankie. We did manage to speculate that his parents were probably pirate, mad scientists, etc., and we do have videos on it, but there's still a lot to be unpacked about Frankie's lineage, particularly around his parents. 2 years later, so 30 years ago, in the Sorbet Kingdom, Bokori begins implementing corrupt policies that target the elderly, forcing them to work to pay their heavenly tributes or face imprisonment without food. This leads to Kuma and Ginny to hold Sunday healings to relieve the old people's pain free of charge. This is when it's alluded to that Kuma is a pastor just like his dad, so we're seeing Kuma's development in contrast to King Bokori's development, which represents the world government. It's the same year that Don Chinjao fights Garp as well and has his head permanently bent, which gives him that grudge against Garp. But what's actually interesting is Garp is super strong, so Don Chinchao's shockwaves, which are said to be really strong as well and very highly defensive, they clearly are super powerful, and we might see something like them types of powers used with the Holy Knights later on in the story. Garp is also training Kuzan during this year, doing the whole battleship bags that we saw, and some more details are given in his Vivre card. At the end of this year is when Odin leaves Wano along with all of his retainers and takes a trial to join the Whitebeard pirates. Despite failing the trial, Whitebeard lets him stay on the crew because he saved Toki. Yeah, and so I should probably mention that it's around this time that Toki arrives after travelling through time using her Devil Fruit power. And she says something along the lines of she doesn't mind how long it takes her to get back to Wano because she's with Odin, implying that Odin's very familiar to her, and as a Joy Boy figure it suggests that Toki knew Joy Boy 830 years ago. Now we move forward 2 years to 28 years ago. Goldie Roger discovers he has a fatal disease. So preparing for what will be his greatest journey, he enters the Grand Line and recruits Crocus as a ship doctor. It's also 28 years ago when Kaido arrives at Wano and starts conspiring alongside Higurashi to put Orochi in place. Nico Olivia leaves Ohara and her daughter Robin to embark on a poneglyph expedition. 27 years ago, the Roger pirates face off against pirate Shiki in the Battle of Ed War. Roger escapes while Shiki suffers massive losses and gets a steering wheel implanted into his head. Obviously there's kind of movies and filler that allude to this sort of stuff, and Oda, out of all of them, I believe he's confirmed that Shiki stuff is canon, despite it not necessarily featuring in manga. However, if you are really familiar with One Piece, you'll know that pretty much all of it's canon anyway. A lot of the filler just adds to the content of the lore that Oda's kind of going for anyway. This is where we start moving into the more modern timeline as well. 26 years ago, Neptune becomes king of the Ryugu Palace. Lola and Chiffon are born, and also Queen joins the Beast Pirates. What's interesting about this is Frankie is abandoned at Scrap Island the same year. And I mentioned earlier about Frankie maybe having mad scientist pirate lineage, and we know that Queen had a child at some point, so it's softly implied that Frankie is Queen's child, which is probably disappointing for a lot of people. But the interesting thing about this is something that pretty much nobody ever touches on, is when you put Queen side by side with Zeph, you can see that the characters are clearly inspired. So it would appear that Queen might be Frankie's dad and Zeph is Frankie's uncle, or something along them lines. But moving back to Roger, him and the Whitebeard pirates have a battle that takes 3 days and 3 nights. And during the 4th day, they make peace. This all happens the same year, so 26 years ago. Roger borrows Odin for his journey, and Inarashi and Neko Mamushi also join alongside him. It's just after this when Roger arrives in Skypiea and makes Odin engrave the message near the poneglyph. This plays into a larger theme of people engraving messages and kind of adds to the idea that there might be a message engraved at Laughtale, the history of the world, or Joy Boy drew a picture or something like that. Shortly after this is when Roger is taken to Zoe and he sees the road poneglyphs under the Whale Forest. It's also during this year that Charlie predicts the mermaid princess will be born in 10 years. And also, Clover travels to Punk Hazard to speak with Vegapunk, requesting him to help study the Void Century with the other scholars, though Vegapunk refuses. Clover reveals his D-lineage to Vegapunk and vows that the voices of the past will be heard, which is something then Vegapunk reiterates in his speech, where he says that he believes the Roger pirates heard the voices from the purest source. All of this is revealed from 1120 onwards. The following year, 25 years ago, Monkey D. Dragon gains notoriety as a captain of the Freedom Fighters, as he was covered in newspapers and labelled a wanting man. This is when we see in Kuma's flashback, Kuma's looking at the bounty poster and kind of is being inspired by him and says that he's somebody's hero. Wano is starting to fall into disrepair and getting worse and worse, and a man refuses to work in the weapons factory, causing him to be executed. Subsequently, Odin's samurai attack the flower capital in rage. However, the beast pirates raided Odin's castle in Kuri, but fail in their mission to kill Momo when Toki sends him and his sister ahead in time, leaving herself behind to be killed. The Roger pirates complete their journey to Laughtale, having conquered the entire Grand Line, and so Roger becomes known as the Pirate King. Shortly afterwards, Roger disbands his pirate crew, allowing them to return to peaceful lives of their own choosing. Kazuki Odin dreams of opening the borders of Wano country in 20 years' time. So if Odin was to open the borders of Wano in 20 years, that would take us to 5 years prior to the modern timeline, and they're still up, which means he didn't do it. Just as Charlie predicted the coming of the Mermaid Princess, Charlie this year predicts the coming of the Great Pirate Era, which starts the following year. Not really much of a reach of a prediction, but fair play, we'll give it to her. During this year is when Odin and Orochi really get into their beef as well, and it culminates with Odin dancing naked in the street for 5 years, and the state of Wano continued to deteriorate. So that's the entire timeline up to the Great Pirate Era. The Great Pirate Era starts 24 years ago. So we've covered 5,000 years ago all the way up to 25 years ago. The part of the timeline before Luffy's journey is called the Great Pirate Era. Now, when did that happen? Well, 24 years ago, the Pirate King Goldie Roger turns himself into the Marines and is sentenced to death. Roger's speech before his death leads pirates to the Grand Line to seek out his hidden treasure, dubbed the One Piece. This event marks the beginning of an era called the Great Pirate Era. Upon hearing of the capture of Roger, and that Roger will be executed within a week, Shiki goes on a rampage throughout Marineford before being brought down by Sengoku and Monkey D. Garp. He is sent to level 6 of Impel Down for his actions. Shanks begins his journey as a pirate captain by asking Buggy to join his crew, but he declines and runs off. So we're marking the beginning of Shanks' journey as a pirate captain 24 years ago. The legendary shipwright Tom is put on trial for building Goldie Roger's ship, the Oro Jackson. He's given a 10-year stay of execution to complete his idea of a sea train and be exonerated of his crime. Heracles loses all of his friends due to the dangers of the Boyne Archipelago. However, we don't know much about that stuff at all, and I'm hoping that soon we get some spice because, I don't know, I do get the feeling that he's gonna play some sort of spicy role in the future. The Boyne Archipelago itself is pretty sus. It connects to Green Bit of Dressrosa as well as the Greenstone Forest that we saw Big Mum's homies in, so yeah, there's a lot of strange lore around that location. The following year, Ryuma's grave is robbed by Moria and his corpse, along with Shizui, is stolen. Moria and his crew fight the beast pirates and are subsequently massacred, leaving Moria as the lone survivor. Considering Moria's kind of elusive connections to Davy Jones, this could be some sort of foreshadowing that Davy was left alone at some point. The year after this, 22 years ago, Nico Olvia is captured by the Marines and her comrades are killed. Jaguar D. Sol frees her and deserts the Marines. Olvia returns to O'Hara and her daughter, Nico Robin, meets Saul. It's also this year that the O'Hara incident takes place. O'Hara is burned to the ground by a busticle summoned by the CP9. Professor Clover, Olvia, and all of the citizens of O'Hara are subsequently killed, and Nico Robin, the sole survivor, begins her life on the run from the world government with a 79 million berry bounty. Jaguar D Sol is frozen by Kuzan, but is eventually thawed out by the raging fires. The thing to take note here is you're seeing a giant being frozen and then thawed later on, right? So this evokes Ragnarok. Around this time, Gaimon arrives at the island of rare animals, and through a mishap is trapped inside a treasure chest. He is left behind by his crew. So this is similar to a lot of other situations we've been talking about, so Heracles is another good example, somebody who ends up on their own. This could evoke Davy. Hachi saves Rayleigh out of the sea and subsequently befriends him. Shiki escapes from Impel Down. It's also when Shanks first meets Yasopp while sailing near Gecko Island. And Ace is born. But unfortunately, his mum, Portus de Rouge, dies shortly after from holding in the birth for an unnaturally long amount of time. Sol leads a group of giants to retrieve the books that the scholars had thrown into the lake in O'Hara after the O'Hara incident and transports these books to Elbaf. Kuma protests against the corruption of King Bakori and the slavery of his citizens, causing Kuma to retaliate against the royal army, which then leads to him being imprisoned along with Ginny and the other protestants. Soon after, they are rescued by Eva and Dragon, and manage to force Bakori into exile, and shortly after this is when they form the Revolutionary Army. Last thing for this year as well, as this is the year that Sabo's born. There's a few interesting people born this year. You've got Sabo, Sugar, Beppo, Ideo, Nojiko, Helmeppo, Charlotte Raisin, Koza, Shimatsuki Kawina, and Nero, for example. Now, 21 years ago, before the current timeline, Vinsmoke Judge attempts to genetically alter his unborn quadruplet sons in their mother's womb in order to give them superhuman capabilities and remove any sense of empathy that they have, right? Standard weekend. However, Sora takes a highly dangerous drug to combat its effects. 3 of their sons are successfully modified, while the drug causes their 3rd son to be born as a normal human. The drug also causes Sora to develop a terminal illness that lasts for a few years before eventually killing her. So that evokes the whole women dying from love sickness, the picture on the St. Brice with the woman with the hole in, the whole Lily Nefertari thing, Vivi's now being captured. So a lot of women seem to get sick and die in One Piece. Probably the most recent example would be Ginny, right? And then that cycle is eventually broken by Kuma, Luffy, and Vegapunk through Bonnie. The following year, 20 years ago, Sol is met by a perfect clone of Vegapunk when he visited the library of Elbaf. Whitebeard claims Fishman Island under his protection, and in doing so, pirates were not allowed to harm or capture the residents there. On Elbaf, Jaguar D Sol establishes the Walrus School at King Harold's request. Okay, so what this represents here, the whole school situation, is that King Harold isn't just changing the image of his country, he's genuinely trying to change the culture of his country through education of the children, right? Children play a massive role in One Piece. We know that their perspectives are developed when they're young through either trauma or other things like that, which Doffy's told us and other people, Smoker, Eustace Kid told us that. So this is quite an important thing here. Also, Kazuki, Odin, and the 9 Red Scabbers try to defeat Kaido to open the borders of Wano, but fail. Odin is executed by Kaido and Orochi. Before Toki's death, she quickly uses the powers of the Toki Toki Nomi to send her son with the Ame no Habakiri and their retainers to safety 20 years into the future. I think it's literally like a few hours later that Kurozumi Higurashi is then killed by Kaido. Semimaru dies of old age, Inarashi and Nekomamushi begin their feud, and Yamato is imprisoned in a cave by Kaido for wanting to be like Odin. He befriends 3 samurai while in there and is read Odin's logbook by them before having his chains cut free. The samurai Shimatsuki Ushimaru, Fugetsu Omuzubi, and Uzuki Tempura make one final effort to kill Kaido and avenge Odin before being killed themselves. Further west up the Grand Line, Scopper Gaban moves to Elbaf and meets Ripley. And also, elsewhere, Belmere, a marine, is caught in battle between marines and pirates in the Oikot Kingdom. She survives and takes 2 orphans she finds, Nami and Nojiko, back to Kokoyashi village. She later adopts both girls as her daughters, and yeah, unfortunately we know what happens after that. The following year, so 19 years prior to the current timeline, Boa Hancock and her sisters are kidnapped and become slaves of the Celestial Dragons. The Red Hair Pirates rescued an island from a rival pirate crew, and Shanks adopted the orphan 2-year-old Uta, having found her inside a chest that they had looted at that time. So yeah, Uta isn't strictly super canon, even though people have said and Oda has said she's pretty much canon. But the reason why it's not really important is because, like a lot of the movies and stuff, this is just a direct parallel to what's going on. So with other characters, you're not going to have them being found born in a chest by Shanks, a character that's been born in a chest. You can only do this with someone like Uta because she's like semi-filler and stuff like that. So all we're being shown here is that Shanks was found in a chest. And yes, he found his daughter in a chest, but it's kind of irrelevant. It's just like foreshadowing that Shanks was, and the effects that that can have on somebody's life and their perspectives. So in other words, it's just a mini exploration of the theme, let's say. Now, the following year, Ringo falls into the hands of Kaido and Orochi. Onimaru starts to protect the weapons left on the graves against the Beast Pirates. It's also this year, 18 years ago, that Vivi was born, Kobe was born, Kami was born, and Marianne is born, right? That's very spicy. All of these characters are pretty important. Kami, for example, is the mermaid that's surrounded by the 5 mermaid quintuplets, which are Nika, Yonka, Sanka, I think it's Ichika, and then Yonka too. Next year, 17 years ago, Queen Otohime begins her campaign of gathering signatures from her fellow fishmen and merfolk in order to appease the world government so that fishmen and humans can coexist together in peace. An incident on an island leaves 500 soldiers being held hostage by pirates. The pirates demand their captain be made the king of the island in exchange for the release of the 500 captives. The world government sends in one 13-year-old boy to end the hostage situation, and he kills the 500 soldiers and then the pirates when they open fire on him. The boy later goes on to become the top killing machine of the secret Cypherpole 9, Rob Lucci. Little side note as well, we do see Hattori around Lucci as a child, so Hattori has been around for a long time and might play a role here. But moving on, an unnamed king of an unnamed kingdom visits Kamabaka Kingdom on Momoiro Island. After he returned, he was Nakama. The incident tore the kingdom and the family apart, and they were later exiled. Bele, son of this unnamed king, became a pirate and would later blame Eva for this incident. So Portus D, Ace and Sabo start saving up money in order to buy a pirate ship, leave Dawn Island and become pirates. Tony Chopper is born on Drum Island. He becomes an outcast of his herd because of his blue nose. So Chopper is born on Drum, a winter island, and he looks very different, and so he's segregated. So again, we're having another person who's being outcast and exiled, and they're isolated. This character also very much ties to Davy Jones again. So it's another example of how it seems that this is foreshadowing for Davy being isolated, maybe from his allies or from his kin. It's also the same year that Virgo passes on the name Corazon to Don Quixote Rocinante. Now, 16 years ago, Fisher Tiger, who was enslaved by the Celestial Dragons for several years, breaks free and heads back to Fishman Island. He talks with King Neptune about deciding to go back to Marijua and free all of the slaves that he regretfully left behind. This is ultra important. Fisher Tiger is a Joy Boy figure, and what Fisher Tiger did was he was liberated. He went all the way to one side of the world and then all the way back. So in this case, it's all the way to the bottom of the ocean, Fishman Island, and then all the way back up the red line to Marijua, right? This is exactly what we expect of people like Joy Boy. He went all the way up to Laugh-Tale, learned something, and then came all the way back to Dawn Island. Roger made the exact same trip. Luffy is expected to make the exact same trip. Shanks started in the West Blue, went all the way to the East Blue to Luffy, and then came all the way back to the West Blue to Laugh-Tale, right? So this is key to understanding that there's like an oscillation of these heroes, or even the Straw Hats. They move up and down, or all the way along and all the way back, which is pretty much exactly what the myth about Kaido and the fact he has a carp fruit and now he's a dragon, if you know about the myth with the carp, that is exactly what's going on here. Another common myth that deals with this is when a monk is at the bottom of a mountain and then they go to the top of the mountain and they think they've reached the peak, but really they actually have to go all the way back down to tell the people about what they found at the peak. Okay, so that is the key motif here, and it's very important to the One Piece story. The extermination of the people of Flevance also occurs 16 years ago. Law is left the lone survivor and is recruited to the Don Quixote Pirates. Virgo left the Don Quixote Pirates to go on a secret mission. Now, also 16 years ago, Shirahoshi was born, Rebecca was born, Pudding was born, and of course everyone's favourite, Karu. Now, 15 years ago, a year after escaping, the adventurer Fisher Tiger goes back and scales the Red Line, as we spoke about, in order to attack Marijua, starting a rebellion that ultimately frees all of the slaves of the Celestial Dragons, including Boa Hancock and her sisters. Fisher Tiger rebrands the mark of the Celestial Dragons on the freed fishermen slaves into the mark of the sun and forms the Sun Pirates, okay? So now we can see that the effect of going all the way to one side and then coming all the way back results in the liberation of slaves. Luffy is on his way to Laugh Tale. When he gets to the end of the Grand Line, he's going to turn around, come back, probably to save Vivi, right? So he goes all the way back, and when he does this, that will result in the liberation of slaves. The Boa sisters are found by Gloriosa, Silver's Rayleigh and Shaki, who take them back to Amazon Lily. Under the orders of Doffy, Virgo joins the Marines. The Nox expedition party becomes the Nox Pirates, after being chased by the world government for searching for poneglyphs. So here we have Nox, which is Latin for night, and these guys are demonized, turned into pirates because they're looking for poneglyphs, which are attached to the Will of D, right? The Will of D is associated with the moon, so yeah, this all fits quite well. A quick aside as well, Foxy's boxing license is also revoked as he's caught cheating with a weapon this year, so that's a clue as to how Davy Jones was beaten, because Davy backfight, right? So in other words, whoever opposed Davy, Emu, or whoever it was, cheated by using a weapon. For those who follow the channel, you're going to know that that weapon is Uranus. Now, 14 years ago, Elbaf Prince Loki and Ja Rule returned to Elbaf's Aurust castle, only to discover King Harold impaled by his own soldiers. Soon after, a scuffle ensued that resulted in the theft of the royal family's devil fruit, and Ja Rule being stabbed through the head. Loki is blamed for all three incidents and flees the country. While Harold dies, Ja Rule survives, and Shanks and Scopper Gaban investigate the incident. If you want to hear some theories on that, we do have a video on the Royal Devil Fruit and how we're pretty confident we know where it is, we know what fruit it was and where it's gone, and I'll give you a clue, it went up into the Sky Islands. Tom's workers complete the first sea train, the Puffing Tom. Beppo leaves Zoe at the age of 8 to chase after his elder brother Zeppo. When he climbed down Zoe to get a view of the sea, he was swept away. He then boards a ship heading for the North Blue. Spandam persuades the Five Elders into giving him the authority to seek out the blueprints of Pluton. Virgo enters G5 base after personally requesting it, and the revolutionary captain of the Eastern Forces, Ginny, is captured by a world noble. The following year, so 13 years ago, while being transported on a world government ship, the Gomu Gomu is stolen by the red-haired pirates. I think it was specifically Lucky Roo that actually grabbed the chest and the fruit. Who's Who, a member of CP9 tasked with guarding the fruit, is put into prison for failing to protect it. Later that year, the Red Hair Pirates arrive at Fuchsia Village on Dawn Island. It's during this year that Shimatsuki Kozuburo gave Zoro a pair of swords to aid in his training. Vivi becomes the vice leader of the Sansan clan. Totu and his son Koza set off from Alabana to set up a village in the oasis of Yuba. Sachi and Penguin's parents die in a tsunami. They are raised by Sachi's aunt and uncle, who make them do illegal activities. The Kuja Empress Tritoma dies from lovesickness. Boa Hancock becomes the new Empress of the Kuja and captain of the Kuja Pirates. She is also given a position within the 7 Warlords of the Sea. Don Quixote, Rosinante, and Law travel to Minion Island to steal the Opi Opinomi to save Law's life, but discovered by the Don Quixote family after accidentally giving an intelligence letter to Virgo, a member of Doflamingo's crew, undercover as a marine. Rosinante is killed by his brother, and the island undergoes the birdcage, which kills everyone except a boy that was a member of the local pirate crew. Doflamingo later recruits Sugar and Monet to his family. Sanji is expelled in the same year from the Vinsmoke family at the age of 8 by his father, Vinsmoke Judge, and he is allowed to leave the Germa Kingdom while they are invading a country in the East Blue. He boards a nearby cruise ship called the Orbit and works there as a trainee chef for the next 2 years. While wandering around Swallow Island, Beppo is bullied by 2 delinquents named Sachi and Penguin. Law witnesses the beating, and Sachi and Penguin pick a fight with him. Law defeats them and Beppo joins up with him. Later the same year, Kawamatsu and Onimaru start to hide the weapons from grave robbers in Wano. Eventually, the Kappa gets locked up in Udon after trying to procure food from the flower capital and eats rotten fish every day for the next 13 years. This is also the same year Foxy eats the Noro Noro Nomi. Now, the next year is 12 years ago and is one of the most important years in the entire timeline. Sugar, aged 10, eats the Hobby Hobby Nomi. As a side effect of the devil fruit, she remains biologically 10 years old forever, something that we know has strong connections to Emu. Redleg Zeph and his cook pirates sail to the Grand Line to find the All Blue. Ginny returns to Sorbet Kingdom after 2 years of her capture and abuse from the world nobles, carrying a newborn child with her that she leaves at the church before passing away from Sapphire Scale. Akuma arrives at the church to find the child, to which he would begin raising her, naming her Jewelry Bonnie. Monkey D. Luffy, aged 7, accidentally eats the Gomu Gomu no Mi kept by red-haired pirates, giving him rubber powers and the inability to swim. Higuma is eaten by a Sea King that attempts to eat Luffy but is saved by Shanks. The latter's left arm is ultimately ripped off by the Sea King. Shanks leaves Luffy's hometown after staying there for almost a year. Shortly after Shanks' departure, Luffy is taken by his grandfather Monkey D. Garp to train with Curly de Dan, and meets his adopted brother Portus D. Ace. Luffy soon forms a brotherhood with Ace and Sabo based on their shared desire to become pirates. The Celestial Dragons come to visit the Goa Kingdom on Dawn Island. In preparation for their arrival, the kingdom's royals hire the Blue Jam pirates to set fire to the Grey Terminal, but most who reside there are saved from being burnt to death by Monkey D. Dragon and the revolutionaries. Sabo is attacked by the world noble Saint Jalmak and presumed dead. He is rescued by Dragon but loses his memories and joins the revolutionaries. Shanks arrives in Sabaody Archipelago and meets Rayleigh. The pirate captain Mont Blanc Cricket arrives at Jaya. He stays to search for the truth about whether his ancestor was a liar so that he may be liberated from his family curse. His crew abandons him shortly afterward. Chow Chow's owner, Hocker, sets up his pet shop in Orangetown the same year. The famous actress Victoria Sindri dies in a tragic accident. Dr. Hogback meets the warlord of the sea, Gecko Moria, along with Absalom and Perona. Hachi visits Shakuyaku and Rayleigh for the first time after joining the Sun Pirates. The revolutionaries start to look for Nico Robin. The Sun Pirates meet Koala, a young girl who was a slave of the Celestial Dragons. Fisher Tiger rebrands her slave mark into the Mark of the Sun, making her the first human to bear the Sun Pirates emblem. Upon returning Koala to her home island, Fisher Tiger is ambushed by a group of Marines led by Rear Admiral Strawberry. After barely escaping the island with a Marine ship stolen by his crew, Tiger chooses to die rather than receive a transfusion of the human blood on the ship. Angered by Fisher Tiger's death, Arlong heads back to Full Shout Island to get revenge on the humans who betrayed Tiger, only to be defeated and captured by Borsalino. He is then imprisoned in Impel Down. Now, the following year, 11 years ago, Jinbei agrees to the world government's terms and becomes one of the 7 warlords of the sea, which allows Arlong to be released from prison. Unfortunately, this led to a massive disagreement between Jinbei and Arlong that caused the Sun Pirates to disband into 3 factions: the Arlong Pirates, the Macro Pirates, and Jinbei's crew. It's also 11 years ago that Zeph returns from the Grand Line. A storm sinks the Orbit and Zeph's pirate ship. Zeph and Sanji end up stranded on an island with very little food for 85 days and are eventually saved. After this, the Baratie is opened. Who's Who also breaks out of prison this year. Kuina and Zoro make a promise for one of them to become the greatest swords people, but after Kuina dies, Kuashiro gives Zoro the Wado Ichimonji to reach his goal. 10 years ago, after capturing ships holding heavenly tribute for the Celestial Dragons and blackmailing the world government for the position, Doflamingo becomes a warlord of the sea. Doflamingo frames Rico Doldo III and his soldiers for various crimes against their own citizens before swooping in and claiming the position of King of Dressrosa. Scarlet is killed by Don Quixote pirate Diamante. Arlong invades Kokoyashi village and begins to build his empire. Belmia is murdered by him and Nami is conscripted into the Arlong pirates. Tom again stands trial for creating the Oro Jackson after the 10-year stay of execution to build the sea train, extended by 4 years so the rail network could be finished. Cypherpole 5, led by Spandam, frames Tom, who is carted away to Enies Lobby. Cutty Flam, also known as Frankie, is presumed dead after attempting to stop the sea train that was carrying Tom, who unfortunately is executed shortly after that. Queen Otohime is assassinated by Hody Jones, who frames a human for it, causing an uproar on Fishman Island. Princess Shirahoshi is marked by Vanderdecken IX, making her a target for his powers. Hody steals the energy pills from the Tamate box and resigns from the Neptune army. In case of another theft, the Minister of the Right places explosives inside the box that will detonate the moment it is opened. Shirahoshi is locked inside Hard Shell Tower at Ryugu Palace to protect her from Deccan's projectile gifts and threats. Peckhams leads the other minks of the Nox pirates who could not continue their journey, leaving just Pedro and Zeppo. Later, Peckhams and his group arrive at Big Mum's territory. There, their lives were saved and they entered into her care. Minatomo sells the blueprints to Kaido's mansion at a pawn shop. Sometime later, Ashura Doji stole the blueprints from Rakuda and ran over to Kuri with them. After hearing about Davy Jones, Foxy starts to amass a crew through Davy backflights. Despite Ashura Doji's warning to wait, many of his friends head to Onigashima to fight Kaido back in Wano. They eventually get killed. Now, the following year is 9 years ago, and a violent war occurs on Kuriagana Island, coating the island in blood and dead bodies and ingraining a violent personality into the human drills of the island. So this is Gloom Island, the one that we see Mihawk on. Koala also joins the Rev Army this year, but other than that, that's about it. And so we go to 8 years ago, where Hiruluk finds Chopper and saves his life. He takes Chopper in as an assistant and surrogate son. Ganfall is replaced as the god of Skypiea in the same year by Enel through a coup d'etat. A meeting is held at Marijois with the World Council to discuss Dragon and his revolutionary movement. And then we move to 7 years ago. Right, 7 years ago is when the Usopp pirates were formed. Hiruluk dies, and upon his death, Chopper goes to live with Kureha, who begins to teach him how to be a real doctor. Kuma is told by a doctor that Bonnie's sapphire scales is incurable, and it will take effect when Bonnie turns 10, forcing him to avoid telling Bonnie the truth. Nico Robin enters the Grand Line and encounters the Red Line. Also, Rob Lucci, Kaku, and Khalifa from Cypherpole 9 go undercover and join the Galilar Company in order to learn more about Pluton's blueprints. Bueno goes to Water 7 with them but gets work as a bartender instead. Brook is captured on Thriller Bark, where his shadow is taken by Gecko Moria and transferred to the corpse of the samurai Ryuma. Brook manages to escape after wreaking havoc on Thriller Bark and creating his legacy among its inhabitants as the Humming Swordsman. Now, 6 years ago is when Bakori returns to the Sorbet Kingdom and attempts to burn his former citizens alive. He and his forces are, however, stopped by Kuma in an event that would be labelled as the Solar Revolution. Afterwards, Kuma would be made the official king of the Sorbet Kingdom. Cutty Flam shows up alive at Water 7. He receives Pluton's blueprints from Iceberg, and Frankie assumes the name Frankie. Nico Robin is hired by Crocodile into Baroque Works as his partner during the same year, so this is all 6 years ago. On the Blue Seas, Loki is defeated and captured by Shanks. He is brought back to Elbath and is subsequently imprisoned on the Treasure Tree Adam, within the country's underworld. It's also when Shanks acquired the status of Emperor. Now, 5 years ago, Captain Kuro fakes his own death and takes on the name Calidor. He becomes the butler for Kaya's family. A drought starts in Alabasta, with the king being suspected of causing it with the use of dance powder. Axham Morgan is honoured for bringing in the infamous Captain Kuro and begins his rise to power in the Marines. The Frankie family begins to collect 200 million berry. Port Gusty Ace, aged 17, leaves Luffy's hometown. Pedro and Zeppo, who continued searching for poneglyphs, eventually set their sights on Big Mum's poneglyph. They infiltrate Whole Cake Island in an attempt to steal the poneglyph from Big Mum, and, by coincidence, Pedro and Peckhams come face to face once again. Pedro and Zeppo are defeated and forced to spin Big Mum's punishment wheel. Zeppo subsequently lands on the 100 Years option, and Big Mum, using the powers of the Sorrow Nomi, steals his remaining 30 years, killing him. She initially plans to take the remaining 70 from Pedro, though she agrees to Peckham's pleas to reduce the punishment by a decade. Pedro then gouges out his own eye in an effort to further quell her anger, and impressed by this, she removes only 50 years from his lifespan. Now, 4 years ago, Vivi and Igaram join Baroque Works to find out more information on who's behind it all. The Spade Pirates are founded by Ace and Masked Deuce. Kaya's parents die, and soon after Kaya falls ill herself. Kobe accidentally ends up as the chore boy for the pirate Alvida. Also, in defiance of Dr. Vegapunk, Caesar Clown performs an experiment involving chemical weaponry on Punk Hazard. The experiment destroys the island's entire ecosystem and leaves many prisoners paralysed. Amigasa village experiences a famine, and Ace and his crew were captured by the villagers of Amigasa who stole their food. The pirates freed themselves but were able to stay in the village as guests for a few weeks. Tama takes a liking to Ace and decides to become a kunoichi for when he returns. Ace and his crew arrive on Onigashima to fight Kaido. He fights Yamato, and as they fight, Ace learns Yamato's desire to leave Wano country. Ace defeats the warlord Hanafuda, causing a need for a replacement after his expulsion. Hanafuda is later killed by enemy pirates on his way to see his children, Ulti and Page 1, but Kaido subsequently looks after the two and recruits them into his crew. Kuma and Bonnie find Vegapunk after the incident on Punk Hazard and request if he can cure Bonnie's sapphire scale. Vegapunk agrees on the condition that he can study and clone Kuma's body to create cyborgs he would then go on to dub as pacifistas, with Saturn overhearing the conversation. Kizaru arrives at Vegapunk's island along with a marine fleet with X-Drake on board, and they surround the island. Saturn on a Denden Mushi relays various terms Kuma needs to follow before Bonnie can be cured, including joining 7 Warlords of the Sea as a replacement for the one Ace defeated, becoming a human weapon and having his memories erased. Kuma agrees to these terms, and for the next 6 months, Bonnie and Kuma would undergo the treatment for the Sapphire Scale and to modify Kuma's body, though during this time, Kuma and Bonnie would eat and dance with Vegapunk, Sentomaru and Kizaru. After a total of 6 months, Bonnie would be returned to the Sorbet Kingdom under government watch from Cypherpol 8 Agent Alpha. During this time, news would spread all over the world that Kuma was the newly elected warlord. Now we move on to 3 years ago. On Mount Columbo, a 16-year-old Luffy was training a special attack he planned to use for later while Kuma observed him from a distance, thinking back to a conversation Kuma had had with Dragon before Dragon disappeared shortly after. Luffy vaguely senses his presence before going back to train. Sometime after, he writes multiple letters to Bonnie, but they were intercepted by Alpha and ripped up. Vegapunk works on Kuma's modifications while speaking with Stussy on whether a clone with will or a human with no will was more of a tragic life. Kuma asked Vegapunk on what it would mean to lose his free will, to which the scientist explains that it would mean that Kuma would lose all emotions and memory, but he would ensure that he would maintain conscious thought for about 1 more year, to which Kuma decided to write another letter to Bonnie for her birthday. On September the 1st, Bonnie celebrates her 9th birthday with the residents of Sorbet Kingdom, but later is deeply upset when she learned another letter didn't get sent, which is because Alpha's hiding all the letters. Hokka goes to the hospital and never returns, leaving Chow Chow alone. Cavendish appears in the New World this same year as a powerful new super rookie, and Green Bull starts his latest fast. So, 2 years ago, war erupts on Broccoli Island. Nero joins Cypherpol 9. 6 months later, Bonnie's sapphire scales have been fully cured, but Alpha refuses to allow her to go outside, claiming she needs to stay until she turns 10. Connie overhears that Alpha is a government agent and orchestrates a plan to allow Bonnie to escape to sea to find Kuma, disguising herself as an elderly Bonnie, while the real Bonnie goes off to escape on a ship. Alpha catches on and attempts to brutalize Bonnie and execute her accomplices, so Bonnie uses her ability to defeat Alpha and go off to sea. It's also this year that Don Krieg leaves the East Blue to conquer the Grand Line. Within a week, he is defeated by Mihawk but manages to escape with his main ship. Luffy leaves Fuchsia Island on his quest to become the Pirate King. He subsequently frees Kobe from Alvida by defeating her. Zoro saves Rika from Zoro, Helmeppo's dog. For defying him and killing Zoro, Helmeppo has Zoro crucified for 9 days without food or water. Luffy rescues Zoro and recruits him as his first crew member. This is when Kobe joins the Marines. Now, Nami agrees to travel with Luffy for their mutual convenience. Luffy, Nami, and Zoro defeat Buggy and his crew at Orangetown, obtaining a map of the Grand Line. Klahadore plans to kill Kaya and inherit her fortune, but the Straw Hats help Usopp defeat him and his crew. They receive the Going Merry from Merry, and Usopp joins the crew. The Straw Hats' Jolly Roger is also established now. Now, Zoro has 2 katanas broken by fighting Mihawk, and then Luffy defeats Don Krieg at the Baratie, and Sanji joins the Straw Hats. At Kokoyashi Village, Arlong breaks his agreement with Nami and is subsequently defeated along with his entire crew. Nami then joins the Straw Hats for real this time. Having defeated 3 people with high bounties, Luffy receives his first bounty from the Marines, 30 million berries. The Straw Hats then enter the Grand Line. Now, at the same time, the newly formed Bonnie Pirates storm a marine-guarded island in an attempt to look for Kuma, but he vanishes away, not wanting Bonnie to find him for her own sake. Kuma, however, muses over Luffy's bounty, finding it ironic how both his and Dragon's Child became pirates. Thatch discovers the Yami Yami Nomi, Teach murders him and steals the fruit. This is when Ace leaves the Moby Dick to find him. Teach then adopts the name Blackbeard and his crew raid Drum Island, causing Wapol to flee in fear. The Rev army leads a coup in Vera, causing it to be taken over. Now, Vera is the island that is one of the 3 locations that Oda revealed in Road to Laugh Tale issue 8, where the road poneglyph could be, and it's looking more and more likely that it was here. Zoro buys the Sandai Kotetsu and Yubashiri from Ippomatsu at Logtown. On February the 18th, Luffy and Usopp create Mr. Snowman and Snow Queen, but they get destroyed when they start arguing. The following day, the 19th, Igaram creates 3 dummies and tries to head over to Alabasta, but Miss All Sunday blows up the ship. The Straw Hats then befriend Vivi, defeat Wapple, recruit Chopper, meet Dory and Broggy, and then head to Alabasta. Dalton is appointed as ruler of the renamed Sakura Kingdom. When they dismantle Baroque Works and take down Crocodile, the government covers it up. Crocodile is arrested by Tashigi and Smoker in Alabasta, both of whom are promoted for their efforts. The drought ends and the peace returns to the country. Princess Vivi returns after having disappeared a few years prior. Nico Robin joins the Straw Hats. Next, Enel is defeated by the Straw Hats. Ganthor returns as the god of Skypiea. The war between the Skypieans and the Shandia ends. Next, Foxy's daily backfight takes place, and his winning streak after 920 victories is broken. Spandam accidentally summons a Buster Call to Eni's lobby a few weeks after this, annihilating the Island of Justice. Shu uses his Sabi Sabi no Mi powers to rust Yubashiri. Rob Lucci and Cypherpole 9 are defeated by Luffy and the Straw Hats. The destruction of Eni's lobby is blamed on the Straw Hats, and all of whom receive bounties. Shortly after, the Going Merry sinks. Kuma then meets with Vegapunk and gets a look at the pacifista he had developed. Vegapunk asks Kuma if he heard about the incident with the Straw Hats at Eni's lobby, prompting Kuma to reveal that their captain Luffy is Dragon's son, while also drawing a comparison between Luffy's power and Nika. March 22nd, Vegapunk creates his satellites. Along with them, he creates the Seraphim, pacifista clones of the warlords S-Snake, S-Hawk, S-Bear, and S-Shark. 3 days later, so March 25th, the Thousand Sunny is manufactured. Frankie joins the Straw Hats. So it's interesting to realise that Vegapunk created his magnum opus with the Seraphim at pretty much the exact time that Frankie creates his magnum opus, and rather than building Battle Frankies, he turns his body into a Battle Frankie and then creates the Thousand Sunny from it. It's around the same time that a small-time mafia thug known as Duval is hunted down by bounty hunters as a result of his striking resemblance to Sanji's new bounty poster. Marines from the Marine HQ are also deployed after him at the behest of Vinsmoke Judge. Shanks makes contact with Whitebeard. Despite Marine efforts, the two meet with each other. 2 days prior to their meeting, Fire Fist Ace was defeated by Blackbeard. He is handed in to the Marines, who set a date for his execution. And this brings us into the events of the Summit War. It took place on the island of Marineford between the Whitebeard pirates and their allies, led by the Emperor Edward Newgate, aka Whitebeard, and the entirety of the Marine headquarters forces, including the 7 warlords of the sea, the only time we've seen them all together. And it all happened over the execution of the Whitebeard Pirates 2nd Division commander, Ace, who we then is told is Roger's son, and we find out is Luffy's sort of surrogate brother. After Blackbeard had murdered fellow crewmate 4th Division Commander Thatch for the Yami Yami Nomi and fled the Whitebeard pirates, he was pursued by his former commander from the 2nd Division, Ace. They do eventually cross paths on Bonaro Island, and they have a massive duel, and the duel ended with Ace's loss, to which Teach handed him over to the world government in exchange for a position in the 7 Warlords of the Sea, a role he was previously declined from due to his lack of reputation at the time. What this does is essentially give Blackbeard immunity from being pursued by the main, by Emu. And we don't know if Blackbeard knows about Emu yet or not. Now, news of the duel between Blackbeard and Ace was spread around the entire world, and the Marines also announced Ace's public execution at Marineford. Aware of the fact that Whitebeard, an emperor who was fiercely loyal to his own crew and allies, was likely on his way, the Marines prepared for his arrival. So, very similar to what we see in the God Valley incident, Shaki was taken there, but in this sense, it was Ace that was taken there. And it's almost a form of bait to bring these pirates and to create a pretty big conflict. And we know that major changes happen in the world when these battles occur, usually because a hero dies or something like that. And there are quotes in the story that allude to this, which we've covered in the Emu Mega Theory. Now, to prevent Whitebeard from attempting to save Ace, most, if not all, of the Marines' highest-ranking men, almost 100,000 strong, along with the entirety of the 7 Warlords of the Sea, were called to Marineford on standby. However, Jinbei's refusal to participate due to his previously established friendship with Ace resulted in his imprisonment on the 6th level of Impelled Down, and Blackbeard commandeered a marine vessel with his crew and sailed away from Marineford shortly before the execution. Knowing that Whitebeard would make his move soon, the Marines had 23 patrol ships observing the pirates. However, all of them were cut off by the Whitebeard pirates, leaving the Marines blind to the pirates' movements. Prior to Ace's execution, the normal citizens of Marineford were evacuated from the town, leaving only the Marines to prepare for battle. Sengoku announced Ace's origins of being the son of Gold D. Roger in front of all of the Marine forces and, consequently, the world. He then mixed lies into his statement, claiming that Whitebeard knew this and was protecting him, all in order to groom Ace into the next pirate king. So here we see Sengoku spearheading what the world government do, which is using false information to propagate lies and demonize the other side. These particular lies are what later leads Squad to betraying Whitebeard, but we'll get into that. In order to match the Marines, they called in all 43 Allied pirate crews and sailed into Paradise. Knowing that they were being monitored by the Marines, the Whitebeard pirates simultaneously destroyed all 23 patrol ships observing them in order to hide their movements. Though Kaido and his crew attempted to attack the Whitebeard pirates, Shanks and the Redhead pirates intercepted them, allowing Whitebeard to get to Marineford. If Kaido would have gone to Marineford, we saw how Sengoku reacted to sort of Blackbeard destroying the island of Marineford, alluding to the fact that it's special in some way, or there might be something under there. But if Kaido went there, it would have been an absolute disaster, and we would have seen a lot more reaction from the world government, I'm pretty sure. Now, Whitebeard coated 5 of his ships, including the flagship, the Moby Dick, as well as a paddle ship. He used the coated ships to infiltrate into the center of the enemy's formation, with the intention of surfacing 4 of them in the middle of the Marineford Bay, while keeping the paddle ship submerged as a trump card. Around the same time, Monkey D. Luffy infiltrates Impel Down in an attempt to rescue his adopted brother Ace from execution, but he failed in his task. Fortunately for him, he made allies in the prison, including Buggy, Galdino, Bentham, the Rev Armies, Eva, Inazuma, and the newcomers, as well as former warlords Jinbei and Crocodile. In order to increase their chances, they orchestrated a mass breakout, randomly freeing prisoners from level 5 upwards. The warlords managed to hijack a ship, and the prisoners were able to successfully escape thanks to Bentham's sacrifice. Though the non-revolutionary army affiliated prisoners thought of staging a mutiny when they heard the ship was heading to Marineford, after Buggy, who through a series of coincidences ended up becoming their messiah, inspired them to take part, the prisoners happily complied. With this, Luffy and the 240 other prisoners sailed to Marineford. So what's really interesting here is we're seeing a mass prison breakout, and this is something that probably happened during the Void Century, or prior to the Void Century, and might have created Joy Boy as the first pirate, as Vegapunk told us. Another thing to take note of, though, also is Impel Down. This happens right before Marineford, and Marineford does have a lot of connections to God Valley. We covered it in a video a couple years ago, but the fact Impel Down is right before that does make me think that this underwater prison might actually be something different, an underwater kingdom. It might be tied to the Davy clan. I personally believe this is why we see so much sea stone there, because I think sea stone's related to Davy. But for more information, you can check that out in our Discord. We're currently talking about it at the minute. Now, having attained the warlord status Blackbeard wished for, he put his plan into action. Shortly before the war started, using his newly gained authority, Teach and Blackbeard commandeered a marine ship and sailed it to Impel Down, with Lafitte hypnotizing the Marines in the Marineford Gates of Justice control room to open the gates whenever a ship approaches. They arrived during Luffy's mass breakout and took advantage of the chaos to infiltrate the prison all the way to level 6. This is where they recruited the strongest and worst pirates there via a battle royale, and also the former head jailer Shiryu after he went rogue. They then sailed back to Marineford with their new comrades for the final part of Teacher's plan. Okay, so back to Marineford. After Sengoku reveals Ace's secret to the world, the Whitebeard Pirates' 43 subordinate crews from the New World appear before Marineford Bay. The Whitebeard Pirates themselves appeared in the centre of the bay, having coated their ships and infiltrated the bay undetected. Which, let's just be honest about it, that is a massive flaw in the Marineford geography, right? Like, it's shaped like a massive crescent moon. But anyway, more importantly, as I say, Marineford has quite a lot of strong ties to God Valley. The fact it is in the shape of a crescent moon is probably something to do with the D-Clan. Marineford probably does have some significance. So Whitebeard coming up from under that in the middle of the circle, I'm guessing that's going to be symbolic. Like, retrospectively we'll be able to look back and be like, oh, so that's what Oda meant with that. And we might even see something during the God Valley incident that kind of mirrors this. Now, Whitebeard sets off a massive earthquake using his Gura Gura no Mi ability that causes 2 giant tidal waves to crash into Marineford as a starting signal for the war. Aokiji froze the oncoming tidal waves and consequently the sea also, so to trap the pirate ships with his Ice Age ability. But this also gives the pirates a surface from which to conduct their attack on, right? They can get off their ships onto the ice and they can start attacking Marineford. Now, as the Marines and pirates converged on the ice, a quick back and forth took place between Newgate and his commanders, the admirals and the warlords. It started with Mihawk launching a long-distance sword slash directly at Whitebeard, which was easily blocked by Jozu using his Kira Kira no Mi ability. So this kind of evokes the whole being able to cut diamond situation, right? And maybe in the future we'll see Zoro specifically cut diamond. Kizaru then followed, launching lasers at Newgate, though Marco transformed into a phoenix and blocked it before kicking the admiral away. Jozu then threw a massive iceberg at the Marines' giant squad, but it was vaporized by Akainu using his magma devil fruit, with the attack bursting and scattering volcanic rocks amongst the pirates as well as destroying one of Whitebeard's ships. So each one of these admirals did one attack and each of them have a very different nature, right? The magma is very messy, there's a lot of sort of friendly fire or just mass casualty, whereas the ice is a lot more controlled and a lot more still and works alongside water. So that's a good contrast. Also at this point is when Little Oars Jr. appeared, creating a hole in the Marines' fortifications, as well as defeating several members of the Giant Squad on his way in a desperate rush to reach Ace. However, he was eventually defeated when Bartholomew Kuma blasted him with his attack, Ursa Shock. Doffy severed his leg with his strings, and Moria pierced him with Tsuno Tokage. However, his rampage did manage to open a clear path to the platform along with Whitey Bay and her icebreaker. So at this point, everything's popping off, and the Whitebeard pirates and their allies are starting to breach the forces. And it's at this point that Luffy and his crew of Impel Down escapees come crashing down from the sky with their ship due to being caught in the frozen tsunami. They survive thanks to the ship conveniently landing in a body of water left in place where Jozu pulled out the iceberg earlier. They join the war against the world government as well, most of them on Whitebeard's side, and Luffy informs Whitebeard about the coded transmission for a secret plan, which involved certain preparations and bringing forward Ace's execution time. Luffy then joined the fray, and though Ace tried to dissuade Luffy from saving him, Luffy retorts by claiming to be his brother, which brought the Marines to wonder how Roger can have a second son when he and Portage de Rouge already died after Ace's birth. As Luffy's actions started affecting the momentum of this battlefield, Sengoku then revealed worldwide that they are adopted brothers, and Luffy is Monkey D. Dragon's son, and is just as dangerous as Ace. This obviously shocks the world, but Luffy just doesn't care and heads straight to the execution stand where he encounters Boa, who just instantly gives him the keys to Ace's sea stone handcuffs. Now, with the support of Jinbei and Eva and his subordinates, the Whitebeard pirates and even Buggy, Luffy makes steady progress to reaching the platform that Ace is on. Newgate managed to convince Buggy to temporarily ally himself with the Whitebeard pirates, and with him the majority of the Impel Down prisoners. During the battle, Newgate suspected that the surrounding battleships may be involved in the Marines' secret plans, and had some allies focus on targeting the ships. About 1.5 hours after the battle starts, Sentomaru brought an army of pacifista units as their master strategy to eliminate the pirates. However, they were ordered not to attack the Whitebeard pirates themselves, but instead the subordinate crews, in order to make it look like Whitebeard made a deal with the Marines to spare his crew in exchange for his subordinate crews. That's Sengoku's kind of like quantum brain plan he's got going on here. It's also around now that the pacifistas begin circling the entirety of Marineford to prevent the pirates from escaping, with the pirates realizing that if they don't target the battleships, they will have no way of leaving. Akainu approaches Squad, one of Newgate's most loyal subordinates, and deceives him by spinning a web of lies about how Whitebeard made secret dealings with the Marines to spare Ace and his own crew by sacrificing the subordinate crews, in order to make Ace the next pirate king like his father, which was made more convincing by the actions of the pacifista. Due to his intense hatred for Roger, who slaughtered his old crew, Squad stabs Whitebeard, and it looks like it kind of goes in the chest or in the heart, and Squad reveals that it's because of the lies the Marines told, like Sengoku's plan. Despite being stabbed, Whitebeard forgives Squad before destroying the frozen tsunamis, allowing anyone who doubted him to escape, though this action reaffirmed to all the pirates that Whitebeard is the Don and they're going to stick with him. With this, Whitebeard himself joins the war. He launches a devastating quake that tilts the entire island and the sea around it in some really interesting shapes, but it was stopped by the 3 admirals before it reached the execution platform. Now, I'm not one for power scaling, but Oda is definitely showing here that one use of this devil fruit would require all 3 of the Admiral's devil fruits to stop it, to negate the effects. So this fruit is definitely particularly strong, and it's in this story arc that we hear that, Whitebeard is the strongest man on the planet and stuff like that, and he does have the power to destroy the world. Obviously, we know stuff about Kaido being super strong, but the whole thing with Kaido is that if he has a one-on-one with anybody, you always bet on Kaido to win. Okay, once most of the Marines retreated to the platform, the encircling wall rose, trapping the pirates in the bay. So all the pirates that are being surrounded by pacifistas are now stuck in the center, in like a kill zone, you could say. Even though part of the wall's mechanism was damaged by Oars Jr.'s blood and pressed down by his body, preventing it from rising, Sengoku orders Akainu to proceed to launch his Ryusei Kazan to devastate the pirates, as well as to melt the ice floor, robbing the pirates of their foothold and destroying Whitebeard's ships, including the Moby Dick. The pirates, losing more and more of their footing, desperately try to destroy the wall, or at least reach Oar's body, which is now the only way to sort of traverse into the plaza. Luffy, in his desperation to save Ace, requests Jinbei to throw him over the wall with a stream of water. When Luffy bypassed the barrier to get into the inner plaza of Marineford, he landed right in front of the 3 admirals, who he promptly attacked and attempted to bypass. Luffy was pretty easily repelled, and the Marines attempted to execute Ace, but failed when the executioners were attacked. Surprisingly, Crocodile, who up until this point was targeting Whitebeard, saved Ace due to his disgust of the Marines and their cheap tactics. This no doubt plays a pivotal role in the future if Crocodile does have any alliance with Luffy, because yes, he attacked Vivi, and we see Luffy's angry at that when he sees Crocodile in Impel Down, but this act is that Crocodile protected his brother, and it's kind of, when he needed him most. So that might come up again later on, but in terms of the grander scheme of things, it's not really that important. Though Luffy failed in his challenge, his actions as well as Oars Jr. regaining his consciousness allowed the Whitebeard pirates a chance to enter the plaza. They did this by having all allies converge on a point where Whitebeard had his last coated galleon-sized paddle ship surface, which Oars then carried into the plaza. Luffy was already exhausted, was targeted by the Vice Admirals and the Admirals, which ended up causing him to collapse. However, still determined to reach Ace, he begged Eva to give him one more hormone boost, despite the after effects being that it cuts your lifespan by 10 years. And he does this so he could continue to fight for Ace's life. Now, Eva reluctantly agrees, and it's then also that, unfortunately, Whitebeard starts succumbing to, his age, injuries, illness, which then starts distracting his kind of crewmates, and that then leads to them kind of suffering some injuries and feeling the pressure. So Jozu ends up completely frozen, for example, and Marco has sea stone cuffs attached to him, preventing him from healing himself. With the Whitebeard pirates' strongest members incapacitated, the Marines, having replaced their executioners, attempted to continue Ace's beheading. However, again, they were stopped, this time by Luffy, who unconsciously releases a burst of Conqueror's Haki throughout the entire plaza, knocking out the executioners as well as many others in his path, leaving everyone pretty shocked as he continues running towards Ace. Again, not to go too deep into power scaling, but, it says something when Luffy's Haki is enough to subdue pretty much everyone there. And generally, it's just an absolutely massive hype moment, so go Luffy. Now, while Luffy's outburst temporarily paralyzes the battlefield, it consequently caused the Marines to redouble their efforts to kill him, with Vice Admiral Doberman declaring that Luffy would be a dangerous criminal one day, and that he was not to leave Marineford alive. Whitebeard, on the other hand, ordered his subordinate crews to back up Luffy, putting their faith in him and kind of tying Luffy to the will of D. There's some super spicy quotes around this time as well. Like, Whitebeard says to Luffy that he's a fool, and One Piece is all about different types of fools. He says that Luffy is a massive ball of energy and that he can't be stopped. And of course, Whitebeard also around this time says about Laugh-Tale being real. So we're seeing that Whitebeard and his troops are kind of putting their faith in who they believe to be like synonymous to Roger or something like that. Now, Inazuma then emerges out of Eva's hair and cuts out a slab of rock into a makeshift bridge to the execution stand for Luffy. Whitebeard and Vista blocks all incoming attacks from the Marines as Luffy keeps going up and up the stairs, and then suddenly Garp jumps in, landing in front of Luffy and breaking part of the bridge in the process. Despite Luffy's request for his grandfather to move aside, Garp refuses, and on the grounds that he's a marine, he's got duties, and Garp prepares to attack his grandson, but at the very last second falters, allowing Luffy to knock him off the bridge. Now, since then we've seen what Garp can do. We know he is a monster in every sense of the word, and it really wouldn't surprise me if we see maybe something again similar like this at the God Valley incident, that maybe Zebek, Domi Reversi was about to destroy Garp or something like that, and then last minute allowed him to survive or resisted it. So yeah, it'll be interesting. Keep an eye on that little detail because it probably will come up in God Valley. After this, Luffy reached the execution platform and was about to use the key to unlock Ace's handcuffs, the one that Boa gave him, but Kizaru destroys the key. Galdino, who had disguised himself as one of the executioners, regained consciousness only to see Sengoku turn into a giant Buddha figure and prepare to do the execution himself. Luffy stopped Sengoku with a gigant balloon, while Galdino protected Ace with a candle wall. So this is really interesting. Sengoku is very, very powerful dude, and somehow Luffy's used the ability that he's used against people like Garp's cannonballs and stuff before, and it just seems to work really well. So I don't know, that's always seemed interesting to me. You'd expect Sengoku to just absolutely flatten him. Now, as the execution platform starts to collapse, the Marines fire their bazookas at the platform. Galdino quickly makes a replacement key using his wax powers and hands it to Luffy, who frees his brother in midair, with Ace in turn saving Luffy and Galdino from the bazooka fire by forming a tunnel of flames around him. So basically the sea stone's off Ace, Ace can now use his abilities, and bang, we're in. After the Marines made several unsuccessful attempts at Luffy and Ace's life, Squad came bulldozing in with Whitebeard's paddle ship. However, Whitebeard stopped his recklessness and ordered the crew and his allies to return to the New World, and he alone would stay behind to finish everything with the Marines. He then launched another shockwave to shatter the Marine headquarters main building. As the pirates retreated on Whitebeard's orders, Akainu launched another great eruption at them, while insulting Whitebeard for being a loser after calling the pirates to retreat. An enraged Ace stayed behind to retaliate with the Fire Fist, only for it to be consumed by the superior magma. Akainu claimed that he would allow neither brother to leave Marineford alive, no matter what, due to their bloodlines. Their very existence is the ultimate crime. So we see Akainu completely embodying the perspective of the Celestial Dragons. That's when Akainu targets Luffy with a molten fist, only for Ace to intercept it. As the entire Marineford saw how Akainu pierced Ace through his torso and burned his vital organs, retaliation for the commanders began. Ace then gave his final words to Luffy before dying in his little brother's arms, causing him to undergo a mental breakdown and fall unconscious. This instantly defeated the Whitebeard's pirates' purpose and changed the tides of the war to favour the Marines. However, Marco managed to encourage the pirates to fight on to protect Luffy, the brother that Ace sacrificed himself to save. Amidst all the chaos, Akainu continued to target Luffy, but was defeated by an enraged Whitebeard. Afterwards, Newgate managed to literally split Marineford into two, separating the pirates from the Marines and causing a defeated Akainu to fall into a crater. Now, interestingly, in the anime, Akainu catches himself on a ledge and then punches a hole, and there's like a tunnel, implying there might be something underneath Marineford, and I'll touch on that in a minute as well, because some other clues. However, after a short confrontation between captains, the Blackbeard pirates delivered the death blow to Edward Newgate, marking the end of Whitebeard's reign as the strongest man in the world, but not before Newgate said his final words: "The One Piece is real." Shortly thereafter, Teach managed to gain the powers of the Gura Gura Nomi alongside his Yami Yami Nomi, declaring to all that his era has begun. We see, Blackbeard throwing a sheet over Whitebeard with his crewmates holding it. I think there's 5 crewmates holding it, which matches the 5 Gorosei, the 5 pointed stars of the Abyss. So there could be some Abyss kind of vibes going on here, but we're still yet to find out. To test out his newfound ability, Blackbeard attempts to sink Marineford entirely, only to be promptly sent flying along with the rest of his crew by an enormous shockwave delivered by Sengoku in his Buddha form, with Garp joining in on the confrontation. Now, this is kind of what I touched on earlier. As soon as Blackbeard says he's going to destroy Marineford, Sengoku freaks out and tells him you don't know what you're doing, implying that there's something else going on with Marineford, potentially underneath or something like that. which is particularly interesting because, as we said earlier, that's how Whitebeard came up to the island from the bottom. Now, after Sengoku taunts Blackbeard for his arrogance, Blackbeard retorts on how he was looking forward to seeing Sengoku out on the field, and the three locked themselves in a duel to the death. Once Teach shook the ground once again, he not only broke the ice that Kuzan created, but also caused a large tsunami to head towards Sabaody Archipelago. Elsewhere, as Akainu re-emerged, planning to kill Luffy and Jinbei, he is cut in half by Crocodile, who sends the wounded duo flying out of Akainu's grasp and straight into the retreating Buggy's hands. Crocodile then confronted Akainu and was joined by the remainder of the Whitebeard commanders, who prepared to face off. At this point, Trafalgar Law surfaced in his submarine, offering to save Luffy. After a few choice words with the commanders, Akainu ordered hundreds of marine reinforcements, previously who bypassed the dividing crack by using underground passageways, to mercilessly annihilate every single pirate in their sight. So again, we're seeing underground passageways, right? It's weird. It's like there's someone underneath there. And there is the 4 rocky columns in the corner as well, which don't match the island. So that adds to it as well. Anyway, Akainu himself leads the charge against the commanders and Crocodile, quickly defeating a lot of them in the initial clash. After Kobe, who was knocked out earlier by Luffy, regains consciousness, he was disgusted and horrified that the war was continuing despite the successful deaths of Ace and Whitebeard, and having just awakened observation haki, he heard the voices of the combatants in his head, disappearing one by one. Seeking to end the violence for good, Kobe puts himself in the way of Akainu, pleading with the Marines to end the battle and tend to the wounded, an action that caused literally every combatant in Marineford to stop fighting, allowing Luffy and Law the time they needed to escape. Unimpressed by this, Akainu dismisses Kobe's pacifism and tries to kill him, only to have his attack intercepted by the Emperor, Red-Haired Shanks, who commended Kobe's courage to speak out against an admiral and his adherence to morality. After reclaiming his straw hat, Shanks claimed that he came to bring an end to the Paramount War. Now, what's interesting here is at the time, we were probably like, wow, Shanks is protecting Kobe, very cool, edgy moment. But realistically, as the story progresses, Kobe's become very, very, very important. So maybe Shanks knew something about Kobe, us readers didn't know, and there's a reason why he was saving Kobe specifically. Next, Shanks throws the straw hat back to Buggy, who gives it to Law as his submarine submerges into the sea, and Shanks threatens both the Marines and Blackbeard pirates to have their forces pull back, lest they wish to face the Red-Haired pirates. With the Gurugura Nomi under his possession, Teach no longer saw the point in resuming the battle and had his crew depart from the battlefield. There's a real key quote where Blackbeard basically says, "I wasn't planning on fighting you yet," so we know that Blackbeard does plan on fighting Shanks, but it was too early at that moment. As Blackbeard leaves the scene, the absence of a designated rival and the presence of a powerful emperor convinces Sengoku to concede to a ceasefire, ordering the Marines to tend to the wounded. With Shanks declaring that the Whitebeard and Red-Haired pirates would retrieve the bodies of Ace and Newgate, the Summit War of Marineford had finally reached its long-anticipated conclusion, however short it may have been. The Summit War of Marineford was a catalyst for the many world-changing events that followed. We got the time skip after, for example. As a result of the war, both Garp and Sengoku retire. Sengoku pushes Kuzan to take the position of Fleet Admiral, but many in the world government voted for Akainu. It was decided that a duel would take place on a deserted island, and the winner would be made Fleet Admiral. The battle between Aokiji and Akainu lasted for 10 days and permanently changed the climate of Punk Hazard. Naturally, that's what of course, if two admirals are going to fight, it's going to be it's going to be huge. But in the end, it results in Akainu winning. Kuzan then chose to resign from the Marines. The war causes heavy losses for the Marines, and as such, the World Military Draft takes place. 2 new admirals, Fujitora and Greenbull, take the places of Akainu and Aokiji. While Marineford was still under construction, Monkey D. Luffy invaded the island a second time, together with Jinbei and Rayleigh, seemingly performed a burial at sea and rang the Oxbell 16 times before escaping. So that's 8 times for the New Age and 8 times for the Old Age. Akainu decided to wage war on the Emperors and thus switched Marine HQ to the G1 base in the New World, creating New Marineford. This is very significant because Paradise is mostly human, right, and mostly controlled by the world government, whereas The New World is very different, very like exotic. A lot of the people there are non-human species or different types of human species. So this is symbolic for basically a Kainu maybe going a bit too far, or he's basically going to start trying to establish order in the New World. The government decided that Moria was too weak and sent Doffy and several pacifistas to assassinate him, but Moria managed to escape. With Teach and Jinbei's defections, 3 positions were vacated in the 7 warlords of the sea. One was offered to Buggy, who accepted. The second was taken by Law, who exchanged the hearts of 100 pirates for the position, while the third was taken by the self-proclaimed son of Whitebeard, Edward Weevil. Through Blackbeard's manipulations, many level 6 prisoners escaped during Impel Down, and Blackbeard increased his own power, causing great embarrassment and alarm for the world government. While the world government had achieved its goal of executing Whitebeard and Ace, the battle was arguably a bittersweet victory of sorts, as it cost the world government considerable resources and men, leading to the loss of several strong individuals, including a Marine Admiral. Instead of being the deterrent towards piracy that the Marines hoped it would be, several very dangerous prisoners escaped without being caught and ended up being the catalyst of a new age, when Whitebeard confirmed the existence of the One Piece world. So just like when Roger told everyone the One Piece is real, etc., Whitebeard's now telling people, and that's with loads of people escaping from Impel Down, so they know there's going to be trouble coming. Overall, the war ended with a new, greater threat for the Marines in the form of Blackbeard and his crew. It also served to increase pirate presence worldwide. For example, Luffy was very famous after this incident, right? So it leads to a giant shift in policy for the Marines, switching from defending citizens to mounting an all-out offensive against pirates, which is reflected, as we mentioned earlier, in the new location of the Marine headquarters, as well as like the increase of bounties all over the place. It's this increased pressure that eventually does lead to Cross-Guild and them guys putting bounties on the Marines themselves. Now, following all that, the Revolutionary Army conquer Centaura. Shizui is given to Zoro by Ryuma. Over 1,000 shadows abducted by Warlord Moria are returned to their original owners. Moria is then defeated, however, he retains Warlord status and no reports are released on any such defeat. Brook then joins the Straw Hats. At the Sabaody archipelago, Luffy punches the world noble Charlos in the face, sparking the Celestial Dragon hit-and-run incident. Kuma sends each of the Straw Hat members flying to a separate island. Afterwards, Vegapunk, on the orders of J. Garcia Saturn, erases the last of Kuma's will, but not before honouring Kuma's request with a built-in command that will allow him to protect their ship. Luffy becomes the first male ever to set foot on Amazon Lily. After this, Luffy breaks into Impel Down, from which Buggy happens to be trying to escape. 241 prisoners successfully escape the prison, making the first mass breakout in history. Meanwhile, Blackbeard invades Impel Down to liberate and recruit the former chief jailer of Impel Down, Shiryu, and several convicts from Level 6, being Vasco Shot, Devon, Samuel Wolf, and Pizarro. Next, the Manticore from Impel Down escapes the prison and is caught by the Big Mom pirates, in which Mont Dior seals it in a book. Kaido and King also attempt to head to Marineford to kill Whitebeard, but are stopped by Shanks and the Red-Haired pirates. Garp and Sengoku resign, and following this, Luffy, Jinbei, Law, and the Heart Pirates are the first males ever permitted to set foot on Amazon Lily, an island that is usually off-limits to men completely. Luffy, Jinbei, and Rayleigh return to Marineford. They sailed around the island once. Luffy rang the Ox Bell 16 times and gave a silent prayer, and they left once again on the Kuja pirate ship. The original childhood lab of Dr. Vegapunk on Karakuri Island explodes after Frankie presses a self-destruct button. This event becomes known to the world as the Nightmare of Baltimore. Soon after that, Frankie causes another incident, which would become known as the Legend of the Sacred Burning Beast of Baltimore. Monkey D. Luffy decides to disband the Straw Hat Pirates for 2 years in order to allow the crew to train and become stronger. At the same time, Buggy is invited into the 7 Warlords of the Sea and he accepts, and Sabo regains his memory of Luffy and Ace before he decides to find the Marinomi. That brings us to an end of that year. However, during the time skip, so 1 year ago, on January the 8th, so right at the beginning of the year, General Frankie is manufactured. A great battle takes place between the Marines and the combined forces of Duval and his Rosy Life Riders, Hatchan and Bartholomew Kuma, over the Straw Hats pirate ship, the Thousand Sunny. In the end, the Marines were forced to retreat, with the Rosy Life Riders, Hatchan and Kuma sustaining serious damage. The Thousand Sunny was left unharmed. An argument occurs between Aokiji and Akainu for the vacant position of Fleet Admiral. The two engage in a duel to the death on Punk Hazard, which lasted for 10 days and left both men severely wounded. In the end, Sakazuki wins and is promoted to the position of Fleet Admiral. This results in the transfer of Marineford to the New World, the relocation of the G1 branch, the resignation of Aokiji from the Marines, and the reconstruction of the Marines. The battle causes one side of Punk Hazard to be permanently embroiled in flames, leaving the other permanently frozen over. The World Military Draft is held, and the two vacant admiral positions are filled by Ishio and Aramaki. After defeating the remnants of the Whitebeard pirates in the Payback War, Marshal D. Teach acquires great notoriety in the New World by conquering Whitebeard's former sphere of influence, attacking and murdering Devil Fruit users, and stealing their abilities to increase the abilities of his own crew, resulting in Teach usurping Whitebeard's previous status as one of the 4 emperors. It's at this time Kuzan becomes a Titanic captain of the Blackbeard pirates too. The Big Mum pirates take over and protect Fishman Island in exchange for 10 tons of sweets a month. So again, we're seeing people being taxed in a very similar way that the Celestial Dragons tax people, and it matches what Arlong did too. The Kid pirates get into a battle with the Redhead pirates, leading to Ben Beckman shooting off Useless Mid's arm. Bartolomeo appears in the New World as a powerful new super rookie. Law obtains a bounty of 440 million for unknown reasons. Trafalgar Law accidentally hijacks the passenger ship Rocky Port vessel in an attempt to collect a poneglyph on Hachinosu. While Law engages the pirates on the island, Kobe and the Emperor Blackbeard arrive for their own reasons. The three cause a large-scale battle with the former Rocks pirate and current ruler of Hachinosu, Ochoku. The battle aftermath results in Kobe being dubbed as the hero of the Marines for protecting the civilians and promotion to captain. It also results in Ochoku's defeat and Blackbeard's takeover of the territory in Hachinosu. After this, Law sends the disembodied but still living hearts of 100 pirates from Hachinosu to Marineford. He is appointed to a Warlord of the Sea position. At the same time, Weevil is appointed as Warlord of the Sea. Also, X-Drake allies with the Beast Pirates and aids in the destruction of Amigasa village. The Kid Pirates raid Totu land and defeat Big Mum's sweet commander Charlotte Snack, as well as plundering a copy of her poneglyph. Worst Generation Pirates Capone Beige, Scratchman Apu, and Arouge each invaded Big Mum's territory, while the other 2 were defeated. Beige and his crew ally with the Big Mum pirates, though Beige secretly begins planning the assassination of Big Mum. He marries Chiffon to seal the alliance. It's also at this time that Komurasaki gradually tricks Bingo into giving away all of his money, and then she later spends it all. Finally, Spandam is promoted to the chief of Cypherpole 0, and former members of Cypherpole 9 help Spandine uncover a plot where the underworld brokers were scheming to take over with former level 6 prisoners from Impel Down. They attacked and destroyed the parties involved, and for their efforts were reinstated as agents of Cypherpole 0. Spandine grows sick, losing most of his influence and authority, causing him to be reduced to a sickbed. As a result, Spandam is demoted to a subordinate under Rob Lucci. Alrighty, so that brings us all the way up to the present timeline, the current story. And it starts with the prince and king of the Goa kingdom dying of a suspicious death, resulting in Steli ascending to the throne. Kinemon, Kiku, Raizu, Kanjuro, and Momonosuke arrive in the Wano country of this year from 20 years ago, having been sent forward through time by the powers of the Toki Tokinomi. While Kiku stays at Wano, the rest leave to recruit allies. It's at this time that Momo eats Vegapunk's man-made devil fruit. Now, the fake Straw Hat crew recruit famous pirates but are unmasked by Sentomaru, who has been promoted into the Marines. The real Straw Hat pirates reunite at Sabaody Archipelago, and word gets out that they are back in action. Upon pursuit by Marines, they escape with their coated ship into the sea. With help from various groups of people, the Straw Hats set off for Fishman Island. As punishment for helping the Straw Hats, Kuma was enslaved by the Celestial Dragon some point later. Madame Charlie of the Mermaid Cafe predicts the destruction of Fishman Island at the hands of Straw Hat Luffy. Meanwhile, Hody Jones, captain of the new Fishman Pirates, and Vanderdecken the Ninth, captain of the Flying Pirates, form an alliance and initiate a rebellion against the Ryugu Kingdom. Princess Shirahoshi manifests her ability to summon Sea Kings in order to stop Noah from falling onto Fishman Island. She is revealed to be the ancient weapon, Poseidon. Around the same time, Jinbei donates blood to Luffy in the very first human Fishman blood transfusion since it was outlawed. Jinbei promises to join the Straw Hats once he finishes taking care of his duties. Next, Neptune frees the human pirates, makes the fishermen subordinates work under him, and arrests Hody, his officers of the new fishermen pirates, and Vanderdecken. Some of the human pirates were later captured by G5. Now, after this, the Straw Hat Pirates are targeted by Big Mom, after Luffy challenging her and declaring himself future protector of Fishman Island. Luffy gives Tamago and Peckham's the treasure that Karibo stole, including the Tamate box with an explosive inside. It's around this time that the Straw Hats finally enter the New World. They form an alliance with the Heart Pirates in order to dethrone Kaido. Smiley eats the candy, causing a poisonous gas that can petrify people to spread across Punk Hazard. The group defeats and kidnaps Caesar Clown at Punk Hazard, before continuing to Dressrosa in order to take down Doffy. Both Virgo and Monet die. Next, G5 take children from Punk Hazard to see Vegapunk. An alliance between the Kid on Air and Hawkins pirates to depose the Emperor Shanks is formed. Jinbei places Karibo in a G5 marine base. The Karibo pirates tried to rescue him, but got captured as he sails free. Karibo ends up on Kaido's favourite island. The Karibo pirates meet up on the island with a marine ship. They defeat Scotch and destroy the factory, but Karibo is taken by X-Drake and is later taken prisoner in Wano. Zoe is invaded by Jack and his division of the Beast Pirates, who cause mass devastation while hunting down the ninja Raizo. Also, all the toys on the island of Dressrosa return to their original forms after Sugar loses consciousness. Sabo, the second in command of the Rev Army, consumes the Mera Nomi, which previously belonged to his late brother Ace. Doffy is defeated, his crew is arrested, and their reign over Dressrosa is returned to the Riku family. Doflamingo's fall sends many nations that depended on him into chaos, allowing the Rev Army to increase their victories and start spreading their influence. 7 crews pledge their allegiance to the Straw Hat Pirates, forming the Straw Hat Grand Fleet, which consists of over 5,000 members. Due to the events from their reunion at Sabaody Archipelago until Dressrosa, all of the Straw Hats receive new bounties, with updated pictures on their posters, and Sanji's status is changed to Wanted Only Alive. After confronting Kaido, the on-air pirates and Hawkins pirates become subordinates of the Beast Pirates, while Kid remains prisoner. Also, Jack attacks Doffy's escort. He sinks 2 of the ships, but is ultimately defeated. He survives, and the newspapers falsely report him as dead. The Blackbeard pirates attack the Revolutionary Islands base of Boltago, resulting in the base being completely destroyed, in which the new base is then located in Momoiro Island. Brooke creates copies of Linlin's Road poneglyph after infiltrating her storeroom, making the Straw Hats one of the few factions in the world to have possession of one at the time. The Tamate box explodes, causing Whole Cake Chateau to fall. Barto and his crew travel to Gartel Island. They burn the Red Hair Pirates' flag and replace it with Luffy's. Pedro blows himself up with dynamite to have the Straw Hats move forward. Katakuri is defeated by Luffy, and Morgans reports all the details of the Sanji's retrieval team's successful raid against the Emperor's Charlotte Linlin to the entire world. Morgans also reveals Sanji's heritage to the world, the formation of the Straw Hat Grand Fleet, and the addition of the former Warlord of the Sea, Jinbei, to the Straw Hat Pirates. Following this news, Germa Kingdom is officially expelled from the government for their attempted alliance. It is also reported that Luffy is considered by certain parts of the world to be a 5th emperor. Okay, now Absalom arrives on Hachinosu and is killed by the Blackbeard pirates. His devil fruit gets eaten by Shiryu. On March the 3rd, Luffy washes up on Kuri Beach in Wano country and saves Tama from a group of beast pirates. Shimotsuki Yasui gets executed. Zoro makes a deal to replace Shizui with Enma. Charlotte Linlin and Kaido decide to form a temporary alliance with their pirate crews, and this is how Wano starts. Also, during the reverie, Kuma is successfully recovered by the Rev Army. Fujitora helps various slaves escape Marige while causing Greenbull to fight him. Cobra inquires to the 5 elders of the fate of his ancestor Nefertari D. Lily, leading to the Empty Throne's occupant Emu revealing themselves to Cobra and engaging with Sabo and Cobra in an attempt to kill them both. Sabo manages to escape, with Cobra entrusting Sabo to tell Vivi and Luffy the truth of the event. Cobra dies from his injuries from Emu, and his daughter Vivi is abducted by Cypherpult Zero, but she is unwillingly rescued by Wapple. Publicly, the death of Cobra is framed on Sabo, and Vivi is declared missing. The 7 Warlords of the Sea system is abolished, and the Marines start to attack the former Warlords. Amazon Lily is raided by the Marines and their Seraphim unit in an attempt to capture Boa, as well as the Blackbeard pirates, leading to various Marines and pirates petrified and Hancock being subdued by Blackbeard. Before anything further can happen, Rayleigh arrives and scares the pirates and Marines off. Shortly after, Captain Kobe is taken hostage by the Blackbeard pirates. Now, on March 17th, during the Fire Festival on Onigashima, the Ninja Pirate Mink Samurai Alliance affiliates begin an attack. Orochi is betrayed by Kaido. It's also now that Lola marries Gotti, Kanjuro reveals himself as a traitor, and his Odin painting kills Ashuradoji. Hera is born, Kanjuro creates the Kazembo before succumbing to his fatal wounds delivered by Kiku and Kinemon. Big Mom is then defeated by Kid and Law. Izo is killed by Cypherpole Zero Agent Maha. Orochi is then lit on fire by the Kazembo and decapitated by Denjuro. And after that he's completely incinerated. Now, Cypherpole Zero Agent Guernica is fatally wounded by Kaido. He manages to take a photo of Luffy in his awakened form before dying. Finally, the Emperor Kaido is defeated by Luffy, and the raid on Onigashima ends in a victory for the Alliance, with Momo declaring himself as the new Shogun of Wano. For their involvement in the defeats of the two emperors, Luffy, Kid, and Law are each issued a bounty of 3 billion. Luffy and Buggy replace Kaido and Big Mom as the new emperors. Green Bull defeats and detains King and Queen and is prevented from killing the newly elected Emperor Luffy due to Shanks, and then retreats. After this, the Lesia Kingdom is annihilated on the orders of Emu after Sabo, who departed from the kingdom, attempted to contact his fellow Rev army members in an attempt to tell them he was not responsible for the murder of King Cobra, as well as what he saw in Marijua. The Straw Hat Pirates arrive at Egghead and enter a temporary alliance with Jewelry Bonnie, as well as Vegapunk, who have been declared to be executed due to him researching the Void Century. Marines Kizaru and J. Garcia Satin and Cypherpole Zero arrive at Egghead to confront him. Charlotte Pudding is kidnapped by Kuzan and Van Auga. Edward Weevil is defeated and captured by Green Bull. Vinsmoke Judge and Caesar Clown form Neo Mads. On Elbaf, Eustace Kid is confronted by Shanks, who ordered the former to give him his robe poneglyph, leading to a battle where Kid and Killer are swiftly defeated, forcing their crew to give up their poneglyphs. Dory and Broggy destroy the Victoria Punk, making a current end of the Kid Pirates. On Winter Island, Trafalgar Law is defeated by Blackbeard, and his polar tang is sunk, making a current end to the Heart Pirates as well. Law's life is saved by Beppo. It's at this time that Vice Admiral T-Bone is killed in the Pepe Kingdom due to his Cross-Guild bounty. Muir's Guard is executed by Garling for helping and protecting Shirahoshi from the World Nobles. On Hachinosu, Garp and Sword perform a rescue operation to retrieve Kobe from the Blackbeard Pirates. The battle leads to the successful rescue of Kobe. However, Garp is defeated and frozen by Kuzan. While captured alive, his public status is left unknown to the rest of the world. Perona successfully frees Moria from his capture on Hachinosu as well. Next, a catastrophic event involving the Straw Hat Pirates, Jewelry Bonnie, Vegapunk, the Marines, Kizaru, and the 5 Elders goes down, and both Kuma and the Giant Warrior Pirates join. During this event, Vegapunk is killed by Kizaru, triggering a pre-recorded message detailing the secrets of the world. So, starting with chapter 1122, the title is The Time is at Hand. The cover page is Smoker. The reason for this is probably to bring up his relevance, as he's been away for a while and he's soon going to be coming back into the story, many of us believe. So the first panel is a reaction to Vegapunk on the big screen, and the narrator says, "The times are a-changing." Vegapunk says, "The fate of the world depends on pirates," which the crowd are kind of questioning. This is evoking the idea that, Joy Boy was the first pirate at the end of the Void Century, and he instigated the changing in times, and as a pirate, he was likely a hero. Additionally, we see Oda putting a lot of effort into the different pieces of clothing and fashion that we see. Lots of details going on in the panels. We see reactions from people around the world in different locations, and they're basically very, very shocked, they're very scared, and they're wondering if the Navy are going to protect them. Meanwhile, we see other reactions from pirates. Pirates seem very, very happy to hear this news, very motivated at the fact that the One Piece is very likely real, according to Vegapunk, who they all believe to be the smartest man in the world. Something that Oda shows us distinctly is a lot of the people that are kind of motivated, like I say, are prisoners, people that are stuck behind bars. And we are shown the guards that are kind of alarmed at the fact that all the prisoners are getting all riled up. At which point, an officer of the prison demands to know why the staff are letting the prisoners hear the message. But the staff reply that every snail in the prison is playing it. In other words, that's Oda telling us, there's no blocking this message. It's worldwide. Everyone's hearing it, even in prison. We also see a few ranking nameless Marine officers that seem very dismayed at the fact that Vegapunk's telling the world the truth. And again, it's kind of like with Akainu's reaction, it almost seems like they kind of have an idea that this is true already. Next, we cut to a picture of Koby. Now, interestingly, in the middle of Koby's hair, we see the little whale tail symbol. And in a recent anime episode, it literally spent like a good 8 seconds just showing Koby's hair with this little two like bobbing up pieces of hair that make this whale tail symbol. I wouldn't usually bring up something so specifically detailed. However, ever since we saw Lilith and the whole Egghead situation with the flashbacks between Ginny and Kuma's mum, we just seem to keep seeing this weird hair like thing going on. And yeah, it's Oda, so it probably means something. Koby has a flashback basically to where he first met Luffy, and when he's questioning Luffy, like saying that he's stupid for wanting to get the One Piece. And then we see him basically committing to the fact that he needs to stop Luffy from reaching Laugh Tale. That is his goal, similar to what Garp was about. So we see Koby here reiterating the fact that he's inherited Garp's will, even though he's not Garp's grandson, which is very traditional of One Piece. The parents or the direct family usually aren't very parenting to their direct child, and instead children are brought up by sort of surrogate parents. A really good example of this, I think, that will be revealed is the fact that Rayleigh and Shaki are probably Mihawk's parents. However, we see when Shaki's revealed to be the previous Empress of Amazon Lily 2 generations ago, that Boa has her leg on Rayleigh's lap, all childlike. Next, we have fan favourite Buggy, who's basically tearing up talking to all of his underlings that pretty much make up the majority of Cross Guild, where we see his support really ramping up, and like the fact that like now it's less about Buggy lying and it's more about Buggy, he has no control out of it. It's grown out of hand. His followers have just become obsessed. After this, we cut to Katarina Devon, who's with Karibo, and she's basically asking Blackbeard, shall we unalive Karibo, or what should we do with him? But Karibo keeps pleading, saying that his information's super valuable, so Blackbeard tells Katarina Devon to bring him to Teach, and Teach then will decide his fate depending on the value of the information. Next, we cut to a very dramatic panel where Topman, in his Hokey form, has really bust up the Iron Giant's arm. The Giants watch on, sort of supporting the Iron Giant, while basically chaos ensues, everything's exploding, things are on fire, and then we quickly cut to the Sunny flying off the edge of Egghead, flying through the sky out of Egghead, which, let's quickly point out, most people have predicted that we were going out of the top of Egghead and over the sort of surrounding battle or military. But while they're in the sky, Nozdro jumps up into the sky at the ship, to which they reply, do something, Zoro, connecting Zoro with Nozdro. Then Oda shows us 2 panels next to each other, which is Zoro pointing east, holding his blade, and Nozdro pointing west, holding his blade. Additionally, we get a couple of reactions from the Straw Hats, and it's fascinating, right? We see Usopp and Chopper with their eyes popping out of their head. So Nika isn't directly interacting with them, but they are, going into the animated, style. Whereas the next panel is Nami, and she's holding her face and she's crying. Her eyes are intact, she's drawn like a proper person. So for some reason, Oda has shown us 2 reactions here. One, where 2 people are affected by the Nika transformation and they're animating, and one that isn't. Now, a lot of people might think that's a bit of a stretch. However, the 2 people that are shown reacting with their eyes popping out are Usopp and Chopper. And Usopp and Chopper are the 2 people that say they are scared to go to Long Ring Longland. And when they get on Long Ring Longland, they're the only 2 characters to stretch. So, what I'm saying is, Here, we might be seeing another example of how fear or how emotion affects certain characters, two of which have been affected completely by the Nika transformation, whereas Nami, who's crying maybe for a different reason, not because she's scared because Nozdoro's coming, but instead she's scared for Zoro, she is completely intact and she's drawn in detail. Next, we get the absolutely epic double panel of MF saying, "I'm sorry, Joy Boy." This is super interesting because it ties to, Zunisha was punished, right? So Zunisha assumably did something wrong. Ace's final words to Luffy were, "I'm sorry." Emeth here, pretty much his final words are, "I'm sorry" to Joy Boy. Joy Boy left an apology letter to Poseidon on the poneglyph. So we are really seeing that apologies seem to be a big theme in Joy Boy's old crew or allies. That's when Luffy appears in Gear 5 and Emeth says, "I want to apologize to you too," making a distinction between the OG Joy Boy that he knows and whoever he's seeing in front of him. He continues saying, "I knew there was no chance he would still be alive," again distinguishing Luffy from Joy Boy as different people. And Luffy does reply saying, "Did you mistake me for someone else?" That quote there, again, can kind of evoke what happened on Long Ring Longland with Tonji, where Tonji said, "Long time no see," and then Luffy says, "Wait, do you know me?" So we are starting to come full circle in this whole, 30-year journey. MF states that Luffy, as in Gear 5, is very, very nostalgic and that it evokes feelings of the past. And then after which, MF really puts the nail in the coffin with the whole punishment vibes I mentioned with Zunisha, because he says, "I hope Joy Boy forgives me. I failed to make him king." Then we get an absolutely huge, beautiful panel of Nozdoro, Jupiter as his massive June sandworm thing, form, or verm as some people want to call it. We see Saturn on the edge of the island. We see the Hoki. They're all going towards the giant ship with just only Emeth stood between them. So it's not looking good for the giant ship at this point. Emeth asks what Luffy's name is, to which he replies, "I'm Monkey D. Luffy, the man who's going to be king of the pirates." At that moment, Emeth says D, and a knot comes undone from somewhere inside him, we assume. Then Emeth requests that he hears the drums of liberation for the last bit of his life, and then he tells Luffy not to die. Next thing you know, everyone's getting absolutely blasted to pieces by the intense haki that's inside the knot tied within Emeth. And the Gorosei are seemingly obliterated and reappear immediately in the throne room at Marineford. It's worth pointing out that Mars is already there from where he's been before. So this is Oda showing us how the Gorosei work, they're sort of the fact that they're like immortal or indestructible. And at this point, we get shown Emu screaming. Not only that, we also, for the second time ever, we get to see the nun-looking person in the room that's with Emu. And this person says "Great Emu" with 2 exclamation marks. They seem very, very concerned. Next is a panel of Emu's silhouetted face, and we see the eyes looking very concerned. We see her panting, and she says, "Joy Boy." We also see a little shiver drawn. So for the first time ever, we have just seen Emu worried or concerned or reactive to a situation, and that situation was Joy Boy. Cut to the Sunny flying through the air, where it just so happens to land perfectly next to the Giant's ship. And we are shown a couple of the ships in the background going after them. The Giants question what just happened and the fact that a robot has haki and how that doesn't make sense, but that which might actually tie to the scene where Frankie, Bonnie and Luffy did the triple attack, and it was said that haki was sensed from somebody, indicating that it could have actually been Frankie, another robot with haki. Usopp and Chopper hug Jinbei and sort of get super excited that they survived, adding a bit of context that Jinbei's helmsmanship helped the situation. But then we cut back onto Egghead Island, where we just see Saturn in his human form stood opposite Emeth. Then we get a flashback, which is very reminiscent of the panel we just saw with Saturn stood opposite Emeth, but instead it's Joy Boy sat opposite Emeth. For the first time, we see a strong silhouette of Joy Boy with the straw hat and a turned up collar on what we can assume is some sort of pirate jacket. He tells Emeth he's going to gather his most powerful haki and seal it inside him. Joy Boy explains he's doing this because Emeth will live far longer than Joy Boy will, softly suggesting that Joy Boy could be human. Joy Boy explains that at some point Emeth will want to save somebody or save himself, and in that situation untie the knot and everything will be okay. We get a very interesting quote from Joy Boy as well, which says, "Whenever it happens, I'll be saving you from here in the past, just like always." This is a pretty strange quote and kind of evokes the idea of like time travel or time manipulation, which we do see with Toki, and we do see with kind of the whole underlying checkered fate motif, which is that like what happened 800 years ago is kind of re-happening now, right? Next we have a very interesting line, even though many would have probably missed it, from Emeth. He says, "Haha, that makes me very happy, blah blah blah." But he also says, "I hope ... I don't get lonely ... right? This is very interesting because Frankie says to Brooke, when he first discovers Brooke's situation, Frankie says, "How did you not get lonely all that time on your own?" Which implies that Frankie was lonely when he was, adrift on that ship rebuilding himself. And now we have Emeth, who's a mech with haki and a soul, saying that he hopes he doesn't get lonely. So loneliness seems to be a bit of a theme between these guys. And that's pretty much it for 1122, but now we move on to 1123. The Void Fortnight, and not the fortnight like the game, but fortnight like 2 weeks, and the Void being reminiscent of the Void Century. We go back to Yamato's cover story. I won't go into too much detail with Yamato's cover story, because very similar to the Wano arc, it is incredibly deep. It needs its own explanation. Each scene is indicative of Odin and of Joy Boy. Not just that, but the history of Wano through the children. We see children stealing, which we saw with Denjiro, Orochi, and Odin. And then we see them being turned into sort of good people, which is the direction Denjiro went in, as opposed to the direction Orochi went in. So, in summary, we could say we're seeing a reformation of Wano through this part of Yamato's cover story. However, it will change as time goes on, and we'll see a lot more exotic scenes that don't necessarily include Wano, and probably will have some lore drops. So, as I say, I won't go too much into detail on the others. The chapter starts with just loads of shots of Marines and Vice Admirals that are either turned into a child, knocked out, or both. The only person that doesn't seem affected by this is S-Snake, who's trying to wake everyone else up, but the comms are coming through from HQ and they're not responding, so HQ is starting to realize something's not right. The Elbathian giants sort of look at the island with some binoculars, check everything that's going on. They see that everyone's wiped out and they're still kind of like amazed by this, after which Luffy says thank you to Emeth with his classic laugh, she, and he does a very big Gear 5 smile, and we see a lifeless Emeth basically just stood there. And just like that, the whole ship goes off to Elbath and we leave Egghead. We have a few shots of the crew. For example, Bonnie is in her child form hugging Kuma. Zoro breathes a sigh of relief. Usopp's crying with happiness and he's just overjoyed to be with the giants, and again we're shown him with Chopper. Luffy is being held in a very interesting position by Nami, but he's basically really old, tongue sticking out, looks like a testicle. We get a few flashes to Vegapunk, who's like not looking too good, and he talks to Sanji and explains the situation. And that's when we get the breakdown that 2 weeks ago, Shaka detected a traitor, and 3 of the Vegapunks basically jump into action and start trying to work out who it is. They quickly realize it's York, and they realize they're going to have to erase some memories, so Vegapunk leaves himself a load of messages and records a message to the rest of the world. Then he accepts that he's going to die, and then the 3 Vegapunks have their memory erased. However, there is one interesting panel where Shaka actually questions what death actually means for somebody like Vegapunk. His brain is revealed to be kept in a humongous tank, and later on we are shown different body parts of Vegapunk, so he can be rebuilt, which does make sense considering he's an ultra super giga genius, right? But it also touches on the broader theme of what life is in One Piece, what death is. We know that, some people when they die their souls go into trees, or so believed. In Wano with the Fire Festival, they send messages up to the dead to communicate with them. So this is Oda sort of open and exploring some deeper concepts, which are going to become more relevant as the story goes on. Straight after this as well, we get a panel where they say they also have to save the artificial island clouds, and that they may be pivotal in saving humanity in the near future. Very interesting. Kind of touches on Wiveria vibes, which links the whole mother flame. You know, in Wiveria we saw the flames inside the bubbles, and now we've seen the mother flame, which looks quite similar. But not just that, it just brings up the whole Sky Island vibe and just a load of possibilities. Not only this, but we know that Balloon Terminal, where Rouge is around Kid's base, and that is further down the Grand Line, so that should be coming up soon. And as I say, Rouge was on Balloon Terminal, and we're expecting to see him too, right? So all of this cloud stuff seems like it will be tying in soon anyway. Next, we see sort of the rest of the events with the three Vegapunks as they erase their memories and wake up and read the note and then put their plan into action. After which we join back to the present, and that's Sanji kind of all filled in with everything he needs to know, and he can essentially go back and tell the crew. The chapter ends with an almost full-page panel of a massive giant pie, and them holding on to Luffy, who looks like a breadstick. He's so skinny at this point, and yeah, he's asking them to wait for him so he can feel better and party with them. Okay, and on to chapter 1124, titled Best Friend. In the cover page, we're shown Yamato basically fend off a kidnapping as they make a pilgrimage to the shrine. I said earlier that I'm not going to go too into detail, and this is kind of why. The Inari shrine is super spicy in One Piece. It ties to Kuina, it ties to Denjiro's transformation, and also we have somebody trying to kidnap a child, which isn't just some like arbitrary choice from Oda. It's relevant, it ties into the history of Wano. But we move on. We start the chapter with Big News Morgan, Vivi, and Wapol, right? So no complaints there, everyone loves it. Morgan exclaims that he wants to make desperation so he can make more sales with his newspapers. And then Vivi is shown to reply, that's gross. Even Vegapunk showed some optimism. And for some reason, whether or not it's an artistic mistake or what, which I believe it is personally because there's no background at all, so it's like the panel was unfinished, Vivi's left eye is just completely closed, the right eye completely open. So unless she's got something in her eye, or there's like some sort of booger scene that I've missed, you know, like before when the boogers are getting passed around and she's got a booger in her eye, I think that's just a mistake. And as I say, that's evidenced by the fact that there's no background, whereas all the other panels have a background. Kind of reminiscent of the ending of Bleach, but let's not get into that. Morgans also threatens Vivi and says basically, mind your own business or I'll expose you. To which Vivi basically doesn't give a shit, and she says no one's going to believe this propaganda you're pushing. And we get a few ladies in the background reacting with love hearts to Vivi's sort of defiance. There's not too much going on here, but it is kind of symbolic that, you know, Vivi, someone who a lot of us speculate is going to come into power by the end of the story, is demanding the truth, is demanding true news, as opposed to propaganda, which is what the world government are all about. Morgans basically talks about the fact that he cannot pass up the opportunity and explicitly says the whole world's sinking and that he's top dog in the sky anyway, so that the upcoming era is actually perfect for Morgan. You could probably unpack a few things here, particularly with like what was said about the Torinomis in Alabasta and their significance, and just like, you know, we don't see many planes or any planes really except for in cover stories. It might tie into the whole clouds thing that Vegapunk was talking about, the fact that Lunarians used to live in the sky races used to live in the sky, hence the name Sky Races. But yeah, I'll let you guys connect the dots and throw some comments down if you've got any ideas. Vivi then gives us another Chad moment where she says, if the world is ending anyway, I'm not just going to grovel to save my own neck. Okay, so we cut back to Egghead with a very detailed, huge panel that shows the ships all sort of wavering around in the swell of the sea, which has been disturbed by all the events that we've just seen. We also see Punk Records floating high in the sky amongst the clouds, and in the foreground we see Sentomaru in a little rowing boat, basically, just absolutely pacing it out of there. We hear a voice over the Dendem Mushi, but everyone's still passed out except for one person, which is Kizaru, who strolls over and answers the Dendem. Akainu asks basically why everyone's knocked out and what's going on with Saturn, implying that he doesn't know that the rest of the Gorosei have teleported with some super cool black magic symbols and basically just has no idea of what's actually going on. Next thing we know, we get kind of a belated flashback from Kizaru where he explains, or where it's revealed that, you know, he's got deep ties to his best friend Vegapunk and he loves him so much, and then he had to kill him. And then we get a real nice panel of him sort of, it cuts back to the present and he's just crying behind his glasses and he's like shouting at Akainu, basically saying, chill dude, like I've just killed my best mate and I'm not in a good place. To which Akainu surprisingly replies, that was my bad, brother, which is kind of interesting. We've never seen a soft side to Akainu before. Now cut back to the sea where the Sunny and the giant ship are just sailing next to each other, and people on the Sunny are saying that it's so quiet. They talk about the fact that there wasn't actually a party, it was called off after a single drink just because Luffy was just too messed up. And also they lament the fact that they failed their main goal, which is to protect Vegapunk, something that really wasn't focused on much at the end of the Egghead arc as a whole. The Straw Hats went to Egghead and basically had the whole island destroyed. Vegapunk is dead, the world is changed. So although like this is just a side effect of Luffy being the sun god and stuff like that, the events that have just happened are catastrophic and extreme. The whole world is now aware that there's true history being hidden from them. But Frankie does retort that they did have to compete with 5 elders, an admiral, Cypherpole Zero, the Seraphim, and a whole armada of warships, and just for some reason they happened to survive. So it's not like they just completely blundered it. Zoro seems pretty pissed off though. He says it's pathetic. He's an emperor now. An old man dying shouldn't affect him this badly. That is interesting. But then next thing we know, Lilith awakes. Lilith wakes up from her little sleepy, and pretty much instantly her radio set goes off. We're now on the giant ship on a sofa with Usopp, Chopper, Nami, Sanji and Lilith. We get a beautiful shot of inside the ship where the sofa is just absolutely colossal and our Straw Hats are tiny. They have their own little ladder so they can get up onto the sofa. But then suddenly she stops crying and she says, "Hey, I'm hungry." And she explains it must be because she's no longer connected to York. Do not ask me how that works. Absolute Deus Ex business. But suddenly Lilith's completely independent. York's completely independent. So I don't know. It's a bit cheap, but that's happened. They tell Lilith there's a table full of fruit. So she goes over to the table and she's introduced to the table by Brook in quite a strange pose. And he says, "Say, the atmosphere from that table seems a bit gloomy, doesn't it?" And there's tons of black lines drawn on the panel, sort of showing this dark vibe, right? So we get this image that Brook, this kind of the ferryman to death, like the ferryman of the River Styx, you know, who controls the passage between life and death. He introduces Luffy, who's at that table, who's absolutely mourning Vegapunk's death. The effect that this has on Luffy is that he eats slower, so I'm not sure if that's relevant. They question Lilith as to why she's okay, and basically she replies, everyone's alive. All the giants and the Straw Hats are just so surprised, and Lilith goes on to explain even if they're functionally dead, they still live on in some way. To which one of the characters replies, "So they're ghosts?" Which is a cool little highlighting of the fact, like, ghost vibes, emu vibes, you know, like yokai vibes, all that sort of undead stuff. Which I explained earlier is kind of a more important theme, you know, death and what death means in One Piece. But since eating, Luffy has become his normal self again. He's not old anymore, he's restored, and he does start smiling, and eventually they do start partying. This gives us sort of a double page setup where there's just a huge party going on, and, you know, that's the end of the Egghead arc officially done. And then the last panel is somebody drinking a bottle saying, "Come on then," who's assumably sat on Elbaf, because the narrator's note says what awaits them in the land of the giants. And that concludes the chapter. We had a break after that chapter, and then the following week we went into 1125. So what constitutes death is the title. And that's something I've been bringing up over the past couple of chapters, right? So it's important here, and the best way I can probably describe it is to use the Gorosei. We have 5 Gorosei. The first one was science, which both in the East and the West we can all strongly relate to. And each Gorosei, we're probably going to get a bit more abstract as to the concept, you know. Wano, for example, is very spiritual, whereas Saturn and Egghead was very mechanical. So it will get more complex, and constitutes death as a title is very important. It also ties to the cover story where we see Yamato on her journey, and we see in the background that Odin's castle is being rebuilt. Okay, so why is this significant? Just to give a brief explanation, Odin's castle was actually ran by Toki Amatsuki. So he left and she was running it. And that's most likely because Kuri was naturally the Amatsuki region. And now, with the death of Orochi and the reformation of Wano, it'll be Hiyori that takes on Odin's castle, right? Because Hiyori was there with the whole Orochi scene. She was playing the shamisen, and she's a pure Amatsuki. And she's got the Amatsuki blood, she's got the Amatsuki hair, and her father was a Kazuki. So again, I won't go into too much detail, but there is a lot of backstory going on about the history of Wano here and stuff that we can kind of glean, but it's very deep and we'd have to work it out. One additional detail is somebody in the panel that's doing the reconstruction has the Kiyashiro family crest on his kimono, which is reminiscent of Dendro, right? Because Dendro, when Orochi died and he cut off Orochi's head, Dendro is the loyalist retainer of the Amatsuki and the Kozuki. But let's move on. So we're back at Egghead again. The island's still on fire, things are not looking good, Punk Records is still floating in the sky, and we see Lucci and Kaku board the ship. They ask what happened to Stussy. Lucci replies that she was killed in action, and Kaku is pretty upset about this. He's definitely more upset than Lucci, showing a far more emotional and attached sort of situation. One additional detail is Hattori flew off Lucci's shoulder when he was bitten by Stussy, I believe it was, and now he's back here. He's a bit ashened up, he's a bit messy, but he's back on Lucci's shoulder. Nothing said about it. Sus as always. Lucci does say, however, we obtained everything we set out for. We then have a panel of Saturn who says, with York, Punk Records and the power station in hand, we have secured access to the eternal mother flame. So before, Lilith mentioned that the island runs on fire energy and it would be ideal if they could have an eternal flame. They also developed the mother flame, and with all these resources combined, you can make the eternal mother flame. Bear in mind how late we are in the story and the fact our protagonist is a sun god, a fiery god. It definitely implies connections to Laugh Tale and what the One Piece actually might be or could be tied to. The camera, so to speak, goes behind Saturn and we see that who he's talking to is the Vice Admirals, and he's given them a pretty stern telling off, to which they reply they want to, make amends by going to Elbaf. However, Saturn says the mistake that they made is far more dire than letting the Straw Hats escape. The main mistake was letting Vegapunk's message get out there. We then get a flashback of Saturn basically giving the Iron Giant to some scientists and them thanking him and being very happy that they've got the opportunity. But then it cuts back to the present, and one of the Vice Admirals basically starts asking if Vegapunk's message is true. And Saturn pretty much reactively looks at him, just gives him the stare of death, and the guy just passes out, blood coming out of his nose and eyes and all sorts. Then we're shown York, who's actually on Egghead Island, and she notices that the cloud machine just will not stop making clouds. It's just pumping them out non-stop. York grabs the bazooka and says it must be Edison who's responsible for this, and fires the weapon at the cloud factory. We see a little darkened panel of just Edison's eye where he laughs and says bingo. What Edison gets her to shoot basically disconnects the top of Punk Records from the bottom, and with all the clouds being made, it takes the top up into the sky. Okay, next we move to Marineford and we see the Celestials freaking out about Vegapunk's message, saying that it can't be true. What's Akainu doing? He hasn't even sorted out the Kuma situation yet since Kuma escaped. But we do see some of the Celestials saying that the floods won't affect them because they live in Marineford. We see one of the Celestial Dragons at dinner and he's got like a 5 o'clock shadow, so kind of like he hasn't been shaving, right? And he's also shouting at his chef. Now, the Celestial Dragon is shouting because he ordered beef and he's been served fish, showing that they're using the local resources since the siege has affected their own meat supplies. But the Celestial Dragon is still kind of a chubby guy, whereas the chef is shown to be very, very scrawny, suggesting that the people that work for him, the slaves and stuff, are undernourished. But then the Celestial shoots the chef and kills him, which we can assume, is going to lead to a situation where if they kill all their workers, they're not going to know how to survive. They're not going to know how to cook their own food and stuff like that, so they'll probably just die out or become dependent. we just generally get a sense that they're not very happy and they're starting to revolt. Now we get one of the coolest scenes I have ever seen in One Piece, which is just Garling strolling in to the throne room towards the Gorosei, and the Gorosei are like, what are you doing here, dude? And he's like, new orders have been bestowed upon me. And he says, the Vegapunk known as York shall henceforth be under my supervision, because he was just named the new defense science warrior god. Mars replies, don't tell me, which is basically saying, like, you know, he knows Saturn's about to get squished. Garling says the world is heading for turmoil. An unprecedented level of rebellion is imminent. This kind of is interesting because it suggests that it's even worse than the sort of events that preceded the Void Century, but I doubt that's true. I imagine it's just what he knows of history. This is as bad as it gets, right? Because the true history is hidden. He also makes a statement to the Gorosei saying, let us work together to better the world, my fellow elders. So this is one of the first times we get a direct and explicit motivation from one of the Gorosei, which is Garling saying he wants to better the world. Whether or not this is true or just some sort of play on words, we'll find out. So that's Garling sat in Saturn's seat, basically. That's a lot of S's. And we cut immediately back to Saturn, who is on Egghead and is basically starting to have his soul sucked out in front of all the Vice Admirals. The Vice Admirals state that they need to do something to protect him because he's their superior. And interestingly, one of them questions what's happening as some sort of disease, which will become more and more important as we go on and we sort of move towards the relationship between Emu and Lily. Stuff like love sickness, amber lead sickness, even the 5-day disease, all of these things, which will be revealed that like the Gorosei were a part of, or they're partly responsible for this sort of these diseases and stuff. The only thing that Saturn says is, no, it can't be, And what we see, right, this is interesting. We see all of him deteriorating, and the very last thing we see of him alive is his eye looking. You know, his eyes are completely disappeared, and he says, Emu-sama, and that's it. We then cut to Emu's eye, and Emu talking directly to Saturn, saying, Saturn, Joy Boy, was behind that escape, and you allowed it to happen. Saturn becomes some weird, silhouetted, stretchy yokai blob and sort of like makes some weird noises that are akin to, have mercy, how could I anticipate that power foiling us? And there's a huge Haki explosion, which leaves completely no trace of Saturn except for bones. Interesting. We don't know how Brook died, right? And he's a skeleton, so that seems a little bit strange, but yeah, let's not get too into that. Moving on. We cut to the top of Egghead that's just flying through the sky like a massive Starlink, and we see all the surviving Vegapunks chipping in. After which we're shown a panel of like what they look like when they've all kind of come together as, you know, like Atlas's left arm, Pythagoras' right arm, Edison's head, Shaka's jacket. And at the end of this little scene, we see Edison contacting the wizard at Waveria that taught Nami during the time skip. Which is interesting, right? Because, as I said before, we've got the clouds, the top of Egghead's flying around. We have Balloon Terminal with a rouge on it, which should become relevant. We have Waveria, which in itself is relevant to Nami, and, like, weather means power, potentially, stuff like that. And on we move to Kamabaka Queendom. We have some of the revolutionaries basically questioning what's going on with the floods, and we see them saying the Void Century covered up a massive war, and that it culminated in ancient weapons technology, plunging the world 200 meters deeper into the ocean. Now, it's an interesting use of words because it says plunging, right? Like the Earth was pushed 200 meters down, whereas we're sort of assuming that the flood's gone 200 meters up. I mean, it's confusing, but that's the details we've been given. So basically, there was a Void Century. The point of the Void Century was to cover up a massive war. That war culminated in ancient weapons technology, which resulted in the world being plunged 200 meters deeper into the ocean. They also go on to say whoever reaches Laugh-Tale and becomes Pirate King might have access to all this devastating power, and that they can't let that happen. Sabo goes on to say that it explains why the Celestial Dragons moved up to on top of the red line because it's the highest point on Earth. But that also tells us that it also reaffirms to us that the red line was there before the 20 Kingdoms Alliance and Emu was up there, which we already kind of had suggested through the fact that we were told Lunarians were on the red line before the Celestials. Eva speculates that this might be why they're making Tequila Wolf, Vodka Wolf, Rum Wolf, and Bourbon Wolf, but for the past 700 years, which is a big reveal because we only previously knew about Tequila Wolf. Now, I've seen a lot of people speculating all these different ideas, but this is a lot simpler than people think, right, in my opinion. The 4 seas make the All Blue together, right? And this 4 bridges make the All Land together. All the bridges are named after alcohols, so them 4 alcohols, right, probably together with some other, green ingredient or something like that, probably creates Binks sake, which is the equivalent of like what Sanji wants from the All Blue, right? He wants to make food from the All Blue. Binks sake will be a liquid, whereas on the All Land, the meeting point of all the 4 bridges, you'll have a liquid, which is Binks sake, right? And the reason why we think it's Binks sake is because of all the alcohol involved and just sort of the significant nature of what it means to bring all 4 places that are split up together and unify them. Following the Egghead incident and the revelations of the pre-recorded message, Punk Records is disconnected from Egghead and floats away due to Edison. Saturn is stripped of his immortality by Emu for allowing Luffy to escape. His position as one of the 5 elders and status of warrior god of science and defense is taken by Figurlin Garling. Bartolomeo and his crew are confronted and beaten by Shanks, and before they could sail away, their ship is sunk by Yasop, making their fates unknown. 2 days after leaving Egghead, the Thousand Sunny is captured by Mugen, and after it passes through the sleeping mists, it's taken to Road. He imprisons the 6 Straw Hats on board inside the Land of Gods on Elbaf. After waking up, Luffy kills the Glut Bunny before being found by Zoro and Sanji, who cooks it for food. Later, the 3 save Nami and Usopp from Iskat and later Chopper. The Straw Hats escape from Road while riding Iskat, and they reach Elbaf's underworld. Luffy makes contact with Loki and makes a deal to free him. Road is subdued by Gerd and Goldberg. After they formally introduce themselves to the Straw Hats, they officially welcome them to Elbaf. The great Eric reaches Elbaf and regroups with the crew. Robin reunites with Saul after 22 years. The Knights of God and Emu make contact on Elbaf, and that leads us into where we are now with the God Valley flashback, which is Loki's flashback. Okay guys, I hope you enjoyed that. That was the last part in this series where we've covered everything from 5,000 years ago, so the start of the One Piece timeline, all the way up until the present day. Thank you for watching, and peace.